Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere so cold that your coffee would freeze before you finish complaining about it. Picture this. You step outside and take a breath, but the air is so frigid that moisture in your lungs crystallizes instantly, creating a soft crackling sound the locals call the whisper of the stars. You're standing in Oymyakon, a village in the Sakha Republic of Russia, where the temperature regularly plummets to -60 degrees Celsius and once hit a staggering -71.2 degrees Celsius back in 1924. Though some locals insist it's dropped even lower in years the thermometers simply couldn't handle. This is the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth, and you probably won't survive your first morning if you forget to plug your car into a heating block overnight. But don't worry, about 500 hardy souls call this frozen corner of Siberia home, and they've been doing just fine for generations. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you bundled up in Canada? Sweating through an Australian summer? I always love seeing how far this little community reaches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes in Oymyakon just as the winter sun begins its reluctant climb, though climb is generous. It's more like the sun peeks nervously over the horizon, realizes what it's gotten itself into, and immediately starts planning its escape. You're lying in a small wooden house, one of the traditional dwellings that dot this village of about 500 people, roughly 750 kilometers from Yakutsk, the regional capital. The walls are thick, layered with insulation that would make a thermos jealous, and you can hear the sound of ice crystals forming on the inside of the windows. Yes, the inside. Triple pane glass does its best. But when the outside temperature is -65 degrees Celsius, and you're keeping the interior at a balmy -5 degrees Celsius, condensation freezes wherever it lands. You swing your legs out of bed, and the floor beneath your feet feels like walking on frozen stone because, well, it essentially is. The ground here is permafrost, earth that's been frozen solid for thousands of years, sometimes extending down over 1,500 meters deep. Historians still argue whether the earliest inhabitants of this region arrived during the last ice age or shortly after. But what's certain is that they figured out something crucial. If you're going to survive in a place where winter lasts 9 months and summer is a generous 3 weeks of temperatures hovering around 20 degrees Celsius, you need to respect the cold, not fight it. The name Oymyakon itself comes from the Sakha word meaning unfrozen patch of water, referring to a nearby thermal spring where reindeer herders would water their animals. It's darkly ironic. Really, the coldest inhabited place on Earth is named after one of its only sources of liquid water. You make a mental note of this as you pull on layer after layer of clothing. Thermal underwear, wool trousers, a thick sweater, a second sweater because why not, a heavy jacket lined with reindeer fur, and finally an outer shell designed to break the wind. You're now wearing roughly 8 kilograms of clothing, and you haven't even added the boots yet. Those boots, by the way, are masterpieces of Arctic engineering. Made from reindeer hide with the fur turned inward, stuffed with dried grass for insulation, and large enough that you can wiggle your toes freely to maintain circulation. Tight boots at these temperatures are basically a one-way ticket to frostbite, and you've heard the stories from old-timers who lost toes back in the Soviet days when they were issued regulation boots that didn't account for, actual human feet. Modern science has given us synthetic materials that wick moisture and insulate brilliantly, but many Oymyakon residents will tell you that nothing beats traditional reindeer fur. It's been field-tested for several thousand years, after all. You glance at the clock. It's 9:30 a.m., and through the frosted window, you can see the faintest glow of dawn. During winter months, Oymyakon gets about 3 hours of indirect sunlight per day. The sun rises around 10 a.m. and sets by 2 p.m., and even during those precious hours, it barely crests above the horizon, casting everything in a perpetual golden hour glow that photographers would kill for if they could keep their cameras functioning. Professional equipment tends to seize up when the lubricants inside freeze solid, which happens faster than you'd think. The house around you is warmed by a central stove that burns through coal or wood at an alarming rate, roughly 20 kilograms per day during the coldest months. There's no central heating system connecting homes in Oymyakon. Each household is its own thermal island, responsible for maintaining its own warmth. A small power plant provides electricity to the village, but it runs continuously because shutting it down, even for maintenance, would mean frozen pipes and potential disaster. The plant itself is a relic from Soviet times, built in the 1960s when Oymyakon was developed into a more permanent settlement rather than just a seasonal stopping point for reindeer herders. You shuffle toward the kitchen area, which is really just one corner of the single-room living space. Most homes here aren't sprawling structures. They're compact, easier to heat, with low ceilings to trap warmth. Your breath is visible even indoors, creating little clouds that dissipate slowly in the cold air. There's a certain beauty to it, the way the moisture catches the lamplight, but it's also a reminder that you're never truly warm here, just varying degrees of cold. On the table sits a block of what was once milk, now frozen solid. Next to it, some meat that doesn't require a freezer because the entire world outside is a freezer operating at temperatures that would make your home appliance weep with inadequacy. You've got fish too, omul and muksun, local species pulled from the Indijurka River that flows, or rather, freezes, nearby. These fish are traditionally eaten raw and frozen, sliced into thin chips that you eat while they're still icy. It sounds bizarre until you try it and realize that the texture is actually quite pleasant, like a very cold sashimi, and it's packed with nutrients your body desperately needs to maintain its caloric burn in this environment. Because let's talk about calories for a moment. Living at minus 60 degrees Celsius means your body is working overtime just to maintain its core temperature. You're burning through 4,500 to 5,000 calories per day doing absolutely nothing strenuous. Just existing, breathing, staying alive. That's more than twice what you'd need in a temperate climate, which means meals here are heavy, rich, and frequent. Butter features prominently. So does horse meat, reindeer, and a lot of soups designed to get warm food into your system as efficiently as possible. You can hear movement from the neighboring house. Someone's diesel generator coughing to life. Diesel engines are common here, but they require special treatment. In winter, you never turn them off. Ever. Because if you do, the fuel gels into a useless sludge and the engine block can crack from the extreme cold. So generators run 24/7, cars idle continuously from October through March, and the village maintains a constant low rumble of engines that becomes as much a part of the soundscape as wind or snow. There's a thermometer mounted outside your window, a special model designed for extreme cold, because regular mercury thermometers only work down to about minus 38 degrees Celsius. Below that, the mercury freezes solid. This one uses alcohol instead, and right now it's showing minus 63 degrees Celsius. That's actually warmer than last week, when it hit minus 68 degrees Celsius and the school briefly considered canceling classes. Only briefly, though. Schools here only close when temperatures drop below minus 52 degrees Celsius for younger children, and below minus 58 degrees Celsius for older students. The cold, apparently, is not an excuse for missing algebra. You move toward the window and scrape away some of the interior frost to peer outside. The village stretches before you in the dim morning light. Low buildings painted in faded blues and greens, streets that are more like packed snow paths, plumes of smoke rising from every chimney into air so cold it seems to freeze the smoke mid-ascent. Everything has a hushed quality, as if the cold has dampened sound itself. And in a way, it has sound travels differently in frigid air, losing some frequencies and amplifying others, creating an acoustic environment that feels simultaneously muffled and sharp. In the distance, you can see the monument that marks Oymyakon as the northern pole of cold. A metal structure with a thermometer permanently displaying ridiculous temperatures, erected for tourists who occasionally brave the journey here. Tourism, believe it or not, has become a minor industry. People fly to Yakutsk, then drive 12 hours along the Road of Bones, so named because it was built by Gulag prisoners during Stalin's reign, and countless workers died during its construction, their bodies allegedly buried in the road itself. Historians still argue whether that last part is literal or metaphorical, but either way, the road has a grim history that matches its treacherous winter conditions. You think about those tourists, arriving in their rented 4x4S with their fancy cold-weather gear bought from outdoor retailers that have never tested their products in anything approaching actual extreme cold. They step out, snap a selfie at the monument, maybe stay one night in the village's small guest house, and then flee back to civilization with a story about surviving the coldest place on Earth. Meanwhile, the locals, people like the family in the next house, or the elderly woman who runs the village's only shop, just shrug and go about their daily business, because this isn't an adventure for them. This is Tuesday. You finish scraping the frost from the window and notice your fingertips have gone numb despite being indoors. That's the thing about cold this extreme. It's patient, persistent, and it will find every gap in your defenses. A forgotten glove, an improperly sealed cuff, a moment of exposed skin while adjusting your scarf. The cold doesn't need long. Frostbite can begin in under 5 minutes at these temperatures, starting as a tingling sensation before your flesh literally freezes. Ice crystals forming between cells and causing damage that can be permanent. But you're learning, adapting, becoming attuned to the rhythms of life at minus 71 degrees Celsius. You understand now why people here move with deliberate efficiency, why every action outdoors is planned and purposeful, why there's no such thing as popping out quickly for anything. The cold is always there, waiting, and it has taught generations of Oymyakon residents a fundamental truth. Respect the freeze, or it will absolutely destroy you. The stove crackles, sending up a few sparks, and you add another log. Outside, the sun continues its weak ascent, painting the ice crystals suspended in the air with shades of pink and gold. It's beautiful in a hostile, otherworldly way, the kind of beauty that reminds you nature doesn't care about your comfort or survival. And yet, here you are, about to face your first full day in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, where 500 people have decided that minus 60 degrees Celsius is merely weather, not a reason to live anywhere else. Word count, 2074. You pull on your outer mittens, massive things that could double as oven mitts for roasting a small bear, and prepare to step outside. Your host family, the Vinokurovs, have already been up for an hour. You can hear Mr. Vinokurov outside, checking on the animals. Yes, animals, because in addition to everything else, people here keep livestock. Hardy Saka horses and cattle that have adapted to survive these temperatures through sheer evolutionary stubbornness and very thick coats. Mrs. Vinokurov appears from behind a curtain that separates the sleeping area from the main room. She's in her 60s, wearing layers that make her appear twice her actual width, and she's carrying a bucket of what looks like ice chunks. "Good morning," she says in Saka-accented Russian. "You slept through the coldest part. It was minus 67 degrees Celsius at 4 a.m. She says this with the same casual tone someone in California might use to mention it rained last night. The ice chunks, she explains, are for melting into drinking water. Running water is a luxury Oymyakon doesn't have, at least not in the traditional sense. Some newer buildings have pipes, but they're insulated like nuclear reactors and constantly heated to prevent freezing. Most homes rely on delivered water, brought by truck from the thermal spring, already starting to freeze by the time it reaches your door. You watch as Mrs. Vinokurov sets the bucket near the stove, where it will slowly melt over the next hour, providing water for tea, cooking, and washing. "You're going to walk to the village center today?" she asks, and you nod. "Stay on the main path. Don't take shortcuts. Last year, a tourist thought he could cut through the fields and got disoriented in the snow fog. Took 3 hours to find him. He lost 4 toes." She pauses. "Still came back the next year, though, missing toes and all. Strange people, tourists." You make a mental note. No shortcuts. Mrs. Vinokurov hands you a thermos of hot tea. Not for drinking on the way, she clarifies, but to pour over your car's door lock when you reach it, because the lock will be frozen solid and no key is getting in there without some liquid intervention. This is the kind of practical wisdom that doesn't appear in travel guides but is absolutely essential for survival. The door opens, and Mr. Vinokurov stomps in, bringing a blast of cold air that makes even the interior of the house feel arctic. His beard is completely white with frozen condensation, making him look like a very grumpy Santa Claus. "The black mare is pregnant," he announces, as if this is both surprising and slightly offensive. "In this weather, crazy animal. Life, apparently, finds a way even at minus 67 degrees Celsius. You're about to find out just how it manages that particular trick." You step outside, and the cold hits you like a physical wall, not metaphorically, but actually genuinely, like walking face first into something solid. Your lungs seize for a moment, instinctively refusing to accept air this cold, and you have to consciously force yourself to breathe shallowly through your nose, letting your nasal passages warm the air before it reaches your lungs. Breathing through your mouth at minus 67 degrees Celsius is a rookie mistake that leads to frozen throat tissue and a coughing fit that can last hours. Ask anyone who's done it once. They'll never do it twice. The world around you is transformed into something alien. Every surface is covered in a thick layer of hoarfrost, ice crystals that have formed directly from water vapor in the air, creating delicate, feathery patterns on every exposed object. The wooden fence posts look like they've been dipped in sugar. The bare tree branches are encased in white, creating a forest of crystalline sculptures. It's gorgeous, in a way that makes you forget for just a moment that this beauty is actively trying to kill you. Your eyelashes immediately begin to collect frost. Each blink adds another microscopic layer of ice until your lashes are thick and heavy, requiring you to occasionally wipe them clear just to see properly. The locals have a trick for this. They apply a thin layer of petroleum jelly to their lashes before going out, which prevents the ice from adhering. You didn't know this trick, so you're learning the hard way, squinting through increasingly frosted vision at the path ahead. The air itself is visible not as fog, exactly, but as a kind of sparkling haze. Ice crystals suspended in the atmosphere catch the weak sunlight and create what locals call diamond dust. Tiny frozen particles that drift lazily through the air like the world's coldest glitter. When you breathe out, the moisture in your breath instantly freezes and falls to the ground with a soft, tinkling sound. This is the whisper of the stars. That phenomenon you heard about, and experiencing it firsthand is both magical and deeply unsettling. Your breath literally freezes and falls at your feet. You're watching your own exhalation turn to ice in real time. The path to the village center is well-trodden. Packed snow that's been compressed and frozen so hard it's basically ice concrete. You shuffle carefully, because falling at these temperatures isn't just embarrassing. It's dangerous. Exposed skin touching frozen ground can stick instantly, freezing to the surface like a tongue to a winter flagpole. Except this is your face or hands, and the consequences are significantly worse than schoolyard humiliation. About 50 meters ahead, you can see a woman carrying 2 large buckets suspended from a wooden yoke across her shoulders. She's heading toward one of the communal water collection points, where trucks deposit water daily. Even watching her is exhausting. Each bucket probably weighs 20 kilograms, and she's walking with steady determination through snow, cold, and early morning darkness. This is breakfast preparation in Oymyakon, a half-hour expedition just to obtain the water you'll need for tea. You pass one of the village's vehicles, a Soviet-era UAZ van that's been idling continuously since October. The owner, a middle-aged man named Pyotr, is outside adjusting something under the hood. Steam rises from the engine, creating a warm microclimate that's probably a balmy minus 40 degrees Celsius. "Morning," he shouts, though his voice is muffled by the thick scarf wrapped around his face. Carburetors freezing again. Third time this week. Modern fuel-injected engines handle the cold better, but many vehicles here date from the 1970s and 80s, relics that keep running through sheer mechanical stubbornness and constant maintenance. Pyotr has modified his van with a custom heating system that circulates warm antifreeze through the engine block continuously, powered by a small diesel heater that burns about 2 liters of fuel per day just to keep the vehicle operational. It's expensive and inefficient, but it's better than the alternative. A frozen, cracked engine block that's essentially scrap metal. "You're going to the shop?" Pyotr asks, and you nod. "Tell Anya I need more engine oil. The cold makes it thick as honey." He demonstrates by pulling out the dipstick, where the oil clings in a sluggish, almost solid mass. Motor oil that would flow freely at room temperature becomes viscous sludge here, requiring special Arctic-grade lubricants that remain semi-liquid even at extreme temperatures. Regular oil would simply freeze, turning your engine into an expensive paperweight. You continue walking, and now you're passing the village's small cemetery. The graves here present a unique challenge. You can't bury people in permafrost using conventional methods. The ground is frozen solid year-round, harder than concrete, so graves are either blasted out using explosives, a practice that's exactly as dramatic as it sounds, or bodies are placed in above-ground crypts built from wood and stone. Some graves are marked with Orthodox crosses, others with traditional Saka symbols, and all are covered in snow and frost, creating a silent, white landscape of memory. Historians still argue whether the indigenous Saka people originally came from the south, pushed north by Mongol expansion in the 13th century, or whether they've been in this region far longer, adapting over millennia to conditions that would kill most humans within hours. What's certain is that they developed survival strategies that modern science is only now beginning to fully appreciate. Specialized clothing, preservation techniques, architectural methods, and a deep understanding of how to read the environment for subtle changes that could mean the difference between life and death. Your destination appears ahead. The village center, such as it is, there's a small shop, a community center that serves multiple functions, and the school, a low, sturdy building painted a cheerful yellow that seems absurdly optimistic given the surroundings. Outside the shop, several people have gathered, their figures bulky and indistinct in their layers of clothing, vapor rising from the gaps in their scarves, and hoods like a convention of friendly ghosts. The shop itself is a marvel of adaptation. You push through the double doors, always double doors, creating an airlock that prevents warm air from escaping, and step into what feels like tropical heat but is probably around 15 degrees Celsius. The temperature shock makes your glasses instantly fog over, and your exposed skin begins to tingle painfully as blood flow returns to capillaries that had contracted to preserve core body heat. Anya, the shopkeeper, looks up from behind a counter that's cluttered with everything from canned goods to ammunition to children's toys. She's in her 40s, originally from Yakutsk, and moved here 20 years ago when she married a local reindeer herder. "You survived the night," she observes, which seems to be the standard morning greeting. Not hello or good morning, but acknowledgement that you successfully didn't die. It's refreshingly honest. The shelves are stocked with items that reveal the unique priorities of Arctic living. Multiple types of thermal underwear, batteries, which die quickly in the cold and need constant replacement, candles for emergencies, enormous quantities of tea, and food that's primarily preserved or canned. Fresh produce is essentially non-existent in winter. Any vegetables are flown in from Yakutsk at prices that would make a city dweller weep. A single tomato can cost the equivalent of $5, a luxury item reserved for special occasions. But there's also frozen fish, stacked like cordwood, and frozen meat in huge blocks. There are bags of frozen berries, cloudberries, lingonberries, blueberries, harvested during the brief summer and preserved in nature's freezer. A single block of frozen cranberries sits on the counter, and Anya chips off pieces with an ice pick to sell by weight. This is grocery shopping in Oymyakon. Less pick items off a shelf, and more chip away at frozen blocks of food with tools that could double as weapons. You mention Pyotr's request for engine oil, and Anya nods, retrieving a bottle from a shelf near the stove, the only place where it stays liquid enough to pour. "He goes through a bottle a week in winter," she comments. "His van is older than my marriage, but it runs, which is more than I can say for those fancy new cars tourists bring. Saw one last month, some German SUV, temperature sensor stopped working at minus 50 degrees Celsius and the entire dashboard froze. The windshield cracked just from the cold. 30,000 euros, and it couldn't handle what Pyotr's van manages every single day." There's a quiet pride in her voice, and you realize this is a recurring theme in Oymyakon. A satisfaction in the reliability of old Soviet technology, built without finesse but with an assumption of harsh use that makes it nearly indestructible. It's not elegant, it's not comfortable, but when the temperature hits minus 70 degrees Celsius, you want the machine that's been proven over decades, not the one with a touchscreen and climate control that stops functioning when it encounters actual climate. A young mother enters with a child bundled so thoroughly you can only see eyes peeking out from layers of scarf and hood. The child is maybe 5 or 6, and completely unfazed by the cold in the way only children who've never known different can be. "Mama, can we get chocolate?" the child asks, and the mother laughs. "It's frozen solid. You'll break a tooth." But she buys it anyway. A small bar of chocolate that has the consistency of granite and will need to be carefully thawed before consumption. This brings up an interesting point about food preparation at these temperatures. Everything is frozen, which means meal planning requires forethought measured in hours, not minutes. Want to make soup? Better take the frozen meat out in the morning so it might be thawed by evening. Want bread? It's been frozen since it was delivered last week, and thawing it too quickly in the heat makes it soggy and unpleasant. The locals have developed a rhythm, a constant rotation of frozen items slowly thawing near stoves, ready for the next meal, while today's leftovers freeze solid almost before they're put away. You purchase some tea, always tea, the social lubricant and warming mechanism of choice, and a can of condensed milk, which is consumed in quantities that would horrify nutritionists but makes perfect sense when you need dense calories and warmth. Anya mentions that a supply truck is expected tomorrow, weather permitting, bringing fresh deliveries from Yakutsk. Fresh is relative. It's a 12-hour drive, so fresh means only a few days old. But in Oymyakon, that counts as practically farm to table. As you leave the shop, you notice a thermometer mounted outside, minus 65 degrees Celsius. The temperature has actually risen a couple of degrees since dawn, which means this is technically warming up. You find yourself mentally recalibrating what words like warm and cold mean. Anything above minus 50 degrees Celsius starts to feel almost pleasant by comparison. Your body is already adapting, your perception shifting to accommodate an environment that exists at the extreme edge of human survivability. The walk back takes you past the school again, and through the windows you can see children at their desks, learning mathematics and literature and history in a heated classroom while outside, the world is frozen solid enough to shatter steel. School attendance is mandatory until temperatures exceed minus 52 degrees Celsius for younger children, which means these kids are tougher than most adults you've met in temperate climates. They think nothing of walking 20 minutes to school in minus 60 degrees Celsius weather, provided they're properly dressed and stick to the established paths. One quirky detail about Oymyakon school: pencils are a constant problem. At these temperatures, the graphite in pencil leads becomes brittle and snaps with minimal pressure. Students learn to write with minimal pressure or switch to pens, though ink can also freeze if the classroom isn't warm enough. Some teachers have students use charcoal sticks instead, a return to ancient writing methods prompted by modern extreme conditions. It's the kind of small adaptation that you'd never think about until you're trying to take notes and your pencil shatters in your hand for the third time that morning. You pass Mr. Vinokurov's stable, where the horses stand in their shelter, their breath creating clouds of vapor that freeze on their muzzles and whiskers, turning them into frost-covered statues that occasionally move and snort. These horses are Saka horses, a breed that's evolved specifically for Arctic conditions, developing thick double coats, the ability to paw through deep snow to reach grass beneath, and a metabolism that can sustain them on minimal food during the long winter. They're smaller than European breeds but incredibly hardy, capable of surviving outdoors year-round in conditions that would kill a thoroughbred within days. The pregnant mare Mr. Vinokurov mentioned is standing near the back, and you marvel at the biological determination this represents. She'll give birth sometime in the next month, in the dead of winter, in temperatures that are hostile to life itself. And yet, she'll do it because life, stubborn, persistent, ridiculous life, has found ways to continue even here, at the edge of what should be possible. Back at the Vinokurov house, Mrs. Vinokurov has breakfast ready. A thick soup made from horse meat and potatoes, with floating chunks of fat that provide crucial calories. There's also stroganina, those thin sliced chips of frozen fish you noticed earlier, and bread that's been thawed and toasted near the stove. The meal is heavy, warming, and provides enough energy to keep your internal furnace running for several hours. You're adjusting, Mrs. Vinokurov observes, watching you eat. First day, tourists can barely function, too shocked by the cold. But you're learning. She pauses. Still, don't get confident. The cold here doesn't forgive confidence. Respect it always, or it will teach you respect in ways you won't enjoy. It's advice you tuck away carefully, right next to don't take shortcuts and keep your mittens on. The morning has taught you that life at minus 71 degrees Celsius isn't impossible, but it requires constant attention, adaptation, and a willingness to let go of every assumption you've ever had about what constitutes normal daily living. Getting water is an expedition. Starting a vehicle is a multi-hour process. Buying groceries means chipping frozen food from larger blocks. And yet, people do it. Every single day. They wake up, tend their animals, go to work, send their kids to school, and live lives that are, in their own way, completely ordinary. The cold is just the backdrop, the constant condition against which everything else happens. You're beginning to understand that Oymyakon isn't a place where people survive despite the cold. It's a place where people have learned to live within the cold, working with it rather than against it, finding the rhythms and patterns that make existence possible at temperatures that should, by all rights, be fatal. The clock shows 11:30 a.m., which means you've got about 2.5 hours of usable daylight left. The concept of commuting to work in Oymyakon is somewhat different from what you might experience in, say, London or Los Angeles. There are no traffic jams here, mostly because there are only about 30 operational vehicles in the entire village at any given time, and they're all moving at cautious speeds over ice-packed roads. But there's still work to be done, and people still need to get there, which means venturing out into the cold for extended periods. Mr. Vinokurov is preparing to check on his reindeer herd, which is grazing about 15 kilometers from the village. This counts as his commute, and you've been invited to join him. He's hitching up a sleigh to one of his horses, not the pregnant mare, obviously, but a sturdy gelding named Frost, which is both deeply unoriginal and perfectly appropriate. The sleigh is a practical affair. Wooden runners polished smooth by constant use, a flatbed for carrying supplies, and absolutely no aesthetic frills whatsoever. This is transportation as pure function. Dress warmer, Mr. Vinokurov instructs, eyeing your current layers with the judgment of someone who knows exactly how inadequate they are. We'll be moving, which creates wind. Wind at minus 65 degrees Celsius is not your friend. This is possibly the understatement of the century. Wind chill at these temperatures can push the effective cold down to minus 80 degrees Celsius or lower, at which point exposed skin freezes in under a minute and breathing becomes genuinely dangerous. You add another layer, a wind-breaking outer shell made from treated canvas, stiff as cardboard in the cold. Over your current mittens, you pull on larger mittens lined with dog fur, specifically, fur from Sokolika dogs, a breed that's adapted to Arctic conditions and whose fur has insulating properties that make synthetic materials look pathetic. Your face is covered by a mask that leaves only a small slit for your eyes, and even that slit is protected by goggles to prevent your eyeballs from literally freezing. Yes, that's a real concern. At extreme temperatures, the moisture on your eyeballs can begin to freeze, causing crystallization that leads to temporary blindness and permanent damage if exposure continues. Your eyes are constantly producing tears to combat this, which then freeze on your eyelashes and goggles, creating an icy buildup that needs to be regularly cleared. It's exhausting, this constant maintenance of your own body's defensive systems. The sleigh departs with a jerk, Frost leaning into the harness with practiced ease. The runners hiss over packed snow, and you're moving at maybe 10 kilometers per hour, a pace that feels absurdly slow until you remember that visibility is limited, the path is treacherous, and falling off a sleigh at these temperatures could easily be fatal. Slow and steady isn't just smart. It's the only option that doesn't end in disaster. The landscape around you is monochromatic. White snow, black trees, gray sky. The sun, now at its peak height for the day, hangs low on the horizon, casting long shadows that make the snow drifts look like frozen ocean waves. Everything is still, silent except for the hiss of the runners and Frost's breathing, which creates rhythmic plumes of vapor that freeze into tiny ice particles before dispersing. You pass what looks like an abandoned building, walls partially collapsed, roof sagging under the weight of accumulated snow and ice. Mr. Vinokurov notices your attention. Old Soviet weather station, he explains, operated from 1960s to 1990s, monitored atmospheric conditions, radiation levels after nuclear tests in the Arctic, that sort of thing. When the Soviet Union collapsed, funding disappeared. Scientists left, equipment was stripped, and now, he gestures at the ruin. Now it's just another frozen monument to plans that didn't survive. The Soviet era left many such monuments scattered across Oymyakon and the surrounding region. During the Cold War, this area was strategically important, remote, difficult to access, and useful for activities that needed to be far from prying eyes. Weather stations, early warning radar installations, storage facilities for who knows what. Some historians still argue whether there were military bases here, possibly even testing sites for biological or chemical weapons, But records are scarce and the Russian government isn't exactly forthcoming with details about Cold War activities in Siberia. What's undeniable is that Soviet investment brought infrastructure to Oymyakon: the power plant, improved roads, regular supply routes, schools, and medical facilities. The village transformed from a seasonal waypoint for nomadic herders into a permanent settlement, with people encouraged, sometimes encouraged with the heavy hand of Soviet relocation policies, to settle and work. The goal was to establish Soviet presence across every corner of the vast territory, to ensure that even the most remote regions were populated, productive, and loyal. Post-Soviet collapse, much of that support evaporated. Population declined as people left for warmer, more economically viable locations. The infrastructure aged without replacement. And yet, a core group remained, people like the Vinokurovs, whose families had been here for generations, whose identity was tied to this frozen land in ways that transcended economic calculation. They stayed because this was home, simple as that, even if home meant minus 71 degrees Celsius winters and isolation that could be measured in hundreds of kilometers. The sleigh crests a small rise, and ahead you can see the reindeer herd. About 200 animals spread across a snowy expanse, pawing through the snow to reach lichen and frozen grass beneath. They're attended by 2 herders on horseback, bundled figures that acknowledge Mr. Vinokurov with raised hands. This is the real work of Oymyakon. Not tourism, not scientific research, but the ancient practice of herding reindeer, maintaining livestock, and living off the land in ways that haven't fundamentally changed in centuries. Reindeer are perfectly adapted to Arctic conditions. Their hollow fur provides incredible insulation. Their wide hoofs prevent them from sinking into snow, and they can detect lichen buried under a meter of snow using smell alone. They're also incredibly important to the local economy and diet. Reindeer meat is a primary protein source. Their fur is used for clothing and blankets. Their bones are carved into tools and decorations, and their presence represents wealth in ways that transcend mere monetary value. Mr. Vinokurov dismounts and approaches the herd, speaking softly in Saka. The language itself is fascinating. A Turkic language that sounds nothing like Russian, filled with throat sounds and vowel harmonies that seem designed for efficiency in a place where opening your mouth too wide in the cold is inadvisable. Most Oymyakon residents are bilingual, speaking both Saka and Russian, switching between them depending on context and comfort. One of the herders rides over, a young man, maybe 25, with a face weathered beyond his years by constant exposure to sun, wind, and cold. 3 new calves last week, he reports, all surviving well. The herd is healthy. This is excellent news. Reindeer calves born in winter face challenging odds, but these animals have evolved strategies that give them fighting chances. Mothers hide their calves in sheltered spots. Calves are born with thick fur already in place, and they can stand and walk within hours of birth, crucial for survival in an environment where immobility means death. You watch as Mr. Vinokurov inspects several animals, checking their condition with practiced hands. He's looking for signs of disease, injury, or malnutrition, all potential disasters when veterinary care is hours away and the cold makes every health problem more serious. A reindeer with a minor infection in temperate climates might recover easily. Here, that same infection could kill within days as the animal's immune system, already stressed by extreme cold, fails to fight off the pathogen. The herders have erected a small shelter, basically 4 walls of stacked snow blocks with a canvas roof, inside which a small stove burns. This is their workspace for the day, a place to warm up periodically without making the long journey back to the village. You're invited inside, and the temperature difference is immediate. Maybe minus 30 degrees Celsius instead of minus 65 degrees Celsius, which feels positively tropical by comparison. Your body's calibration is already shifting. What would have seemed horrifically cold a week ago now feels like relief. Tea is produced. Of course, tea is produced. Tea is the universal constant in Siberian hospitality, along with frozen meat that's thawed near the stove and eaten with bread. The conversation is minimal. These are people comfortable with silence, who can sit together for long minutes without feeling the need to fill the air with words. It's a different social rhythm from what you might experience in cities, where silence is awkward and every moment needs to be occupied with sound. One of the herders, noticing your interest, begins to talk about the land. He points to various features visible through the shelter's opening. A distant ridge where good grazing can be found in summer, a river valley where fish are plentiful during the brief thaw, a forest where they hunt elk when times are difficult. His knowledge of the terrain is encyclopedic, accumulated over a lifetime of observation and passed down through generations. He knows which areas are safe to traverse, which look solid but hide dangerous ice weaknesses, which spots are prone to sudden fog that can disorient even experienced travelers. This is indigenous knowledge, the kind that doesn't appear in textbooks or GPS systems but is essential for survival in extreme environments. Anthropologists have studied these knowledge systems, trying to document them before they're lost to modernization and cultural change. But there's something that doesn't translate well to written form, the tacit understanding that comes from lived experience, the subtle environmental cues that you only learn to read by spending years, decades, watching and learning from people who've watched and learned from those who came before. The conversation turns to changes they've observed over the years. Winters are different now, the older herder says. Less predictable. 20 years ago, you could know, absolutely know, that the first snow would come in mid-September, that the river would freeze by October 10th, that spring thaw would start April 20th. Now, he shrugs. The patterns are broken. Snow comes early or late. Temperatures swing wildly. Ice that should be solid is treacherous. This is climate change as experienced in the Arctic, where warming is occurring at roughly twice the global average rate. It sounds paradoxical. How can the coldest inhabited place on Earth be warming? But the data is clear. Average winter temperatures have increased by several degrees over the past 30 years. Permafrost is thawing in some areas, and the timing of seasonal changes has shifted. For people whose survival depends on reading environmental patterns, this unpredictability is deeply unsettling. Yet it's still astoundingly cold. Even with warming trends, we're talking about average temperatures increasing from, say, minus 50 degrees Celsius to minus 48 degrees Celsius. This isn't a change that makes Oymyakon balmy. It's a change that makes survival strategies developed over generations slightly less reliable, which in extreme environments can be the difference between life and death. The wind picks up, howling around the shelter's walls. This is one of the genuinely frightening aspects of Arctic weather. Sudden changes that can strand you far from safety. A clear day can become a wide-out blizzard in minutes, reducing visibility to zero and making navigation impossible. People have died within sight of their homes, unable to find their way through wind-driven snow that obscures all landmarks. Mr. Vinokurov checks his watch, an ancient Soviet model that still ticks reliably despite decades of abuse, and announces it's time to return. The reindeer herd is healthy, the herders are supplied, and darkness is approaching. In Oymyakon, you don't push your luck by staying out after dark unless absolutely necessary. The temperature drops further once the sun sets, and what's merely dangerous in daylight becomes potentially lethal in darkness. The return journey is quiet, each of you lost in thought, faces buried in scarves and masks, bodies swaying with the motion of the sleigh. Frost's breath creates a continuous stream of vapor that freezes instantly into tiny ice crystals, creating a glittering trail in the air behind the sleigh. The landscape is darkening, shadows deepening, and the few lights visible from the village ahead seem impossibly distant and warm. You pass an old wooden pole stuck in the snow beside the path, and Mr. Vinokurov explains it's a marker, one of many that line the route to help travelers navigate during blizzards when visibility drops to zero. Lost 3 people here in the 1980s, he says. A family trying to reach the village during a storm. They were found 2 days later, frozen, less than a kilometer from safety. After that, we installed markers every 100 meters. Haven't lost anyone on this route since. It's a grim reminder that for all the adaptation and knowledge, the Arctic remains fundamentally hostile to human life. Every journey outside is a calculated risk. Every decision carries potential consequences, and complacency is punished swiftly and without mercy. The cold doesn't care about your experience or your intentions. It simply waits for a mistake, and then it takes everything. The village lights grow closer, and you can make out individual buildings now. The yellow school, the blue community center, the various homes with smoke rising from their chimneys into the darkening sky. It's not much, this collection of structures huddled against the cold, but after hours in the open landscape, it looks like civilization, safety, warmth. You understand suddenly why people stay, why they don't flee to easier climates, because this is theirs, built and maintained through collective effort and stubborn determination, a human foothold in a place that should be empty. Frost knows he's close to home and picks up his pace slightly, the sleigh runners hissing faster over the snow. Your face is numb despite the layers, your fingers and toes are aching with cold despite the insulated gloves and boots, and you're profoundly tired in a way that has nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the constant energy expenditure of simply staying alive in minus 65 degrees Celsius. Mr. Vinokurov guides the sleigh to his stable, and you dismount with stiff, awkward movements. Your joints feel frozen, your muscles tight, and it takes conscious effort to make your body move properly. This is what hours in extreme cold does to you. It saps your strength, slows your reactions, makes even simple movements feel laborious. But you made the journey. You went 15 kilometers out and 15 kilometers back, you worked with the reindeer herders, you experienced the landscape and survived it. It's a small accomplishment in the grand scheme, but here in Oymyakon it means something. It means you're learning, adapting, becoming slightly less of a liability and slightly more capable of functioning in this frozen world. Tomorrow you'll do it again, because that's how life works here. Not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through the steady repetition of necessary tasks, day after day, in temperatures that exist at the absolute edge of human endurance. The school bell rings at 8:30 a.m., though rings is generous. It's more of a muted clang, the metal clapper sluggish in the cold despite the bell being indoors. You're standing outside Oymyakon School, a sturdy single-story building that's been reinforced, insulated, and heated to the point where it consumes roughly a third of the village's power output during winter months. Inside, approximately 70 children ranging from 6 to 16 years old are settling into their classrooms, and you've been given permission to observe how education functions when the thermometer reads minus 66 degrees Celsius. The entrance is a triple-door system, an airlock design that's become standard in Arctic architecture. You push through the first door, wait in a small chamber while it closes behind you, then proceed through the second door into a slightly warmer vestibule, and finally through the third door into the school proper. The temperature differential is staggering, from minus 66 degrees Celsius outside to roughly 20 degrees Celsius inside. A swing of 86 degrees that your body registers as a physical shock. Your glasses fog instantly, your nose begins to run as frozen mucus thaws, and your skin tingles painfully as blood vessels expand. The walls are covered with children's artwork, crayon drawings of reindeer, paintings of the northern lights, essays pinned to cork boards. One essay, written in careful Russian cursive, is titled My Summer Vacation and describes 3 weeks when the temperature rose to 20 degrees Celsius and the author went swimming in the river. The fact that 20 degrees Celsius counts as swimming weather tells you everything you need to know about perspective and adaptation. The principal, Svetlana Dmitrievna, is a woman in her 50s who's been teaching here for 30 years. She greets you with the weary warmth of someone who's explained her job to outsiders many times before. People always ask the same questions, she says, leading you down a hallway. How do children get to school? What happens if it's too cold? Do pencils really break? She smiles. The answers are, carefully, we have rules, and yes, constantly. The temperature threshold for school closure is minus 52 degrees Celsius for children under 12, and minus 58 degrees Celsius for older students. These aren't arbitrary numbers. They're based on decades of experience determining at what point the risk of frostbite during the walk to school exceeds the educational benefit of attendance. Some children live within the village and have short walks. Others come from surrounding areas and might walk 30 to 40 minutes in the cold. We teach them from age 5 how to recognize frostbite, Svetlana explains. White patches on skin, numbness, tingling. If they see it, they go to the nearest house immediately. Everyone in Oymyakon knows to take in a child who knocks on their door in winter. This is another example of the collective survival mentality that makes life here possible. Individual safety is community responsibility, because there's no other way to survive. You enter a classroom where 15 children aged 7 to 8 are having a mathematics lesson. The teacher, a young woman who introduced herself as Anna Pavlovna, is writing problems on a blackboard with chalk. Not markers, because markers freeze solid even in heated rooms if they're too close to windows. The children are dressed in lighter clothes than they'd wear outside, obviously, but still in layers. Sweaters over shirts, thick socks, and slippers to keep feet warm on floors that, despite heating, never quite lose their chill. The lesson is about division, and Anna Pavlovna is using reindeer as the example. If grandfather has 240 reindeer and divides them equally among his 4 sons, how many reindeer does each son receive? It's practical mathematics, grounded in the economic reality of the students' lives. Many of these children will grow up to be herders themselves, and understanding how to divide and manage herds is genuinely useful knowledge. One child raises a hand, but teacher, grandfather wouldn't divide equally. The eldest son gets more. It's tradition. Anna Pavlovna laughs. You're absolutely right, Kolya, but for mathematics, we pretend everyone is equal. The class giggles, aware of the gentle fiction being employed for educational purposes. The classroom has large windows, triple-paned, sealed with special insulation, and through them, you can see the pale morning light illuminating the frozen landscape. Several children keep glancing outside, watching the sky, because weather awareness is survival instinct here. A sudden storm could mean school dismisses early to get children home before conditions deteriorate. There's a wood stove in one corner of the classroom, supplementing the central heating, and next to it sits a pile of pencils in various states of brokenness. Anna Pavlovna notices your attention. We go through about 500 pencils per month across the whole school, she says. The cold makes them brittle. We've tried everything: special Arctic-grade pencils, mechanical pencils, different graphite hardnesses. Nothing really works. The children learn to write with very light pressure, or we use charcoal sticks or sometimes crayons, which are more flexible. This is such a small, specific problem, and yet it perfectly encapsulates the challenges of maintaining normal activities in abnormal conditions. Every single aspect of daily life requires adaptation. You can't take anything for granted, not pencils, not running water, not the assumption that materials will behave the way they're supposed to. During the break between lessons, you observe the children during what passes for recess. They don't go outside, not at minus 66 degrees Celsius. That would be criminally negligent. Instead, they have a large indoor gymnasium where they run, play tag, and burn off energy. The room is loud, chaotic, filled with the universal sounds of children being children. Laughter, shouts, the occasional tears when someone falls or a game goes wrong. But there's also an undercurrent of competence that's unusual in children this young. They dress themselves in complex layers without assistance. They understand instinctively how to regulate their body temperature, and they can read weather conditions with accuracy that would shame many adults from temperate zones. A 7-year-old girl explains to you that the ice crystals forming on the gymnasium windows mean the temperature has dropped further, probably to minus 68 degrees Celsius or minus 70 degrees Celsius, and they should expect school to close early. She's right. At 11 a.m., an announcement crackles over the PA system. Temperature has reached minus 69 degrees Celsius, and school is dismissed. Children begin the practiced routine of bundling up, layer after layer, scarves wrapped precisely to cover mouths and noses, goggles positioned, mittens checked. Teachers move through the chaos, helping younger children, double-checking that everyone is properly prepared. We walk the youngest ones home in groups, Svetlana explains. Teachers escort them, ensure everyone reaches their destination safely. Older children can walk alone or in pairs. They're experienced enough. But we never, ever let a child under 10 walk alone in these temperatures. You watch as a group of 6-year-olds lines up, holding onto a rope stretched between 2 teachers. They'll walk together, the rope ensuring no one gets separated or falls behind, a human chain making its way through the cold. It's a system developed through necessity, refined over years, and absolutely critical for safety. One peculiar aspect of education in Oymyakon is the emphasis on traditional knowledge alongside standard curriculum. Children learn mathematics and literature and history, yes, but they also learn how to read animal tracks in snow, how to identify safe ice, how to build emergency shelters, how to recognize edible plants during summer, and how to navigate using landmarks when visibility is poor. These aren't elective courses. They're considered fundamental life skills, as important as reading or arithmetic. An older class, students around 14 years old, is studying biology, and their current unit is on Arctic adaptations. The teacher, a gruff man named Viktor Stepanovich, is explaining how the Saka horses survive winter. Their metabolism slows, reducing energy requirements. Their coat develops in 2 layers, dense underfur for insulation, and longer guard hairs that shed snow and moisture. Their hooves harden to break through ice crust when pawing for food. But most importantly, he pauses for emphasis. They don't fight the cold. They accept it, adapt to it, work within its constraints. It's a biology lesson, but it's also philosophy, a worldview being transmitted to the next generation. Don't fight the environment, don't rage against conditions you can't change. Instead, adapt, find strategies that work within the constraints, and persist. It's the mindset that's allowed human settlement in Oymyakon for generations, and it's being taught as deliberately as any scientific principle. You notice one student has a laptop, a surprising sight in such a remote location. Viktor Stepanovich explains, "We have internet now, satellite connection. Not fast, not always reliable, but it connects these children to the wider world. They can research topics, communicate with students in other regions, access educational resources. It's changed education here dramatically. There's a complex tension in this. The internet brings knowledge, connection, opportunity, but it also brings awareness of how different life is elsewhere, how much easier existence can be in warmer climates with better infrastructure and more opportunities. Every year, some students graduate and leave, drawn by the promise of universities in Yakutsk or Moscow or beyond, and many don't return. The population slowly declines, and the school enrollment numbers drop year by year. Historians still argue whether remote settlements like Oymyakon have sustainable futures, or whether they're slowly dying, maintained by an aging population with fewer young people choosing to stay. The school is both a symbol of resilience. Look, we're still here, still teaching, still preparing the next generation, and a marker of decline. Only 70 students now, down from over 120 years ago. During lunch, the cafeteria serves hot soup, bread, and boiled potatoes. The food is simple but substantial, designed to provide calories and warmth. Children eat with focused attention, understanding intuitively that food is fuel, especially important in an environment where their bodies are constantly burning energy to stay warm. You sit with a group of older students and ask what they want to be when they grow up. The answers are varied. Teacher, reindeer herder, truck driver, veterinarian, engineer, doctor. Some want to stay in Oymyakon, others want to leave. One 16-year-old girl named Sasha says she wants to study in Moscow but come back to teach. Someone has to, she says simply. If everyone leaves, there's no school. No school means families with children leave. Then the village dies. I don't want that. It's a heavy burden for a teenager to carry, the responsibility of an entire community's future resting on her shoulders and those of her peers. But she seems to accept it with the same matter-of-fact pragmatism that everyone here applies to the cold, the isolation, and the challenges of daily existence. Another student, Dmitry, wants to be a filmmaker. He wants to document life in Oymyakon, show the world what it's really like, counter the sensationalized media coverage that treats the village as either a frozen hellscape or a quirky tourist attraction. We're just people, he says, living our lives. It happens to be very cold, but we're not suffering constantly. We have birthday parties and gossip and arguments with our parents and all the normal things, but nobody shows that. He's right. Media coverage of Oymyakon tends toward extremes. Either it's portrayed as a place of incredible hardship where people are barely surviving, or it's exoticized as a bizarre curiosity, with journalists marveling at frozen fish and eyelashes. The mundane reality that people here live relatively normal lives, just with different baseline conditions, rarely gets attention because it's not dramatic enough. Classes resume after lunch, and you observe a literature lesson where students are reading Russian classics. The irony of reading Pushkin's poems about spring and warmth while sitting in a classroom in -69 degrees Celsius weather is not lost on anyone. The teacher makes connections between the text and their environment. When Pushkin writes about winter, what do you think he means? How is his winter different from ours? The discussion that follows is surprisingly sophisticated. These children understand that their experience of winter is not universal, that for most of the world, winter means temperatures barely below freezing, perhaps some snow, but nothing like the minus 70 degrees Celsius extremes they endure. They're aware of their uniqueness, their outlier status in the global human experience. By early afternoon, the temperature has stabilized at minus 68 degrees Celsius, still brutally cold but not dangerous enough to keep school closed for the rest of the day. The decision is made to continue classes until the normal dismissal time at 3 p.m., when families will already be preparing for the evening and can ensure children get home safely. In a corner of the library, you find a display case containing artifacts from the school's history, photographs from the 1960s showing the original building, smaller and less insulated. Class photos from various decades showing how student population has fluctuated. Old textbooks preserved as historical documents. One photograph from 1983 shows a group of students outside in what the caption indicates was minus 71 degrees Celsius weather, the day before school was officially closed. They're bundled beyond recognition, only eyes visible, standing stiffly in the cold for the photograph. Svetlana finds you studying the display. That was the old policy, she says. School only closed at minus 75 degrees Celsius. We lost a child that year, not from that day, but from a similar cold day. 8 years old, got disoriented on the walk home, wandered off the path. They found him the next day. She's quiet for a moment. After that, we changed the rules. Better to miss school than risk children's lives. It's a sobering reminder that every policy here is written in experience, often tragic experience, and that the rules aren't arbitrary bureaucratic nonsense but hard-won knowledge about what's survivable and what isn't. The final bell rings at 3 p.m., and the dismissal routine begins again. Bundling, checking, organizing into walking groups. You watch as the children file out into the darkness. Because yes, it's dark now, the sun having set around 2 p.m., and won't rise again until nearly 10 a.m. tomorrow. This is their reality for months. Going to school in darkness, coming home in darkness, learning and playing and growing in a place where sunlight is a scarce resource and cold is the defining characteristic of existence. And yet they seem happy, not despite the cold, necessarily, but existing alongside it, accepting it as the backdrop to childhood. They have friends, they have games, they have dreams and arguments and crushes and all the complexity of young human life. The cold is just one variable among many, significant but not all-consuming. As you leave the school, one small thought crystallizes. Resilience isn't dramatic. It's not heroic poses against adversity. It's children learning division with reindeer examples, teachers stockpiling broken pencils, parents organizing walking groups, and communities deciding collectively what level of cold is too dangerous to risk. It's ordinary life maintained through extraordinary effort, made to look easy through practice and shared determination. The mid-afternoon darkness has settled over Oymyakon like a heavy blanket, and you're accompanying a hunting party preparing to venture onto the frozen Indijurka River. Food acquisition in winter here isn't a matter of visiting a supermarket. It's an active, ongoing process that requires skill, equipment, and a healthy respect for an environment that can kill you in multiple creative ways. The temperature has moderated slightly to minus 64 degrees Celsius, which locals consider good hunting weather, a phrase that should probably be examined by psychologists specializing in risk assessment. Your guide is a man named Jaeger, 40-something, with a face carved by wind and cold into sharp planes and permanent squint lines. He's been hunting and fishing these lands since childhood, learning from his father, who learned from his father, in an unbroken chain of knowledge transmission stretching back generations. In winter, we mostly fish, he explains while loading equipment onto a snowmobile, one of the few modern concessions to traditional practices. The river freezes solid by October, stays frozen until May. Fish are down there, swimming in water that's just barely liquid, and we need to reach them. Ice fishing in Oymyakon is not the leisurely activity you might picture from Minnesota or Canada, where people sit in heated shacks over small holes drinking beer. Here, the ice is 2 to 3 meters thick, solid enough to support vehicles, buildings, and anything else you care to put on it. Reaching the water below requires serious equipment. motorized ice augers with reinforced bits, or traditional hand augers that demand strength and patience in roughly equal measures. Jaeger's snowmobile pulls a small sledge loaded with gear. An auger, fishing rods designed for ice fishing, nets, a portable stove, because of course there's a stove, warmth is survival, and a large plastic tub for transporting fish. You're also bringing food, extra fuel, emergency supplies, and enough backup equipment that you could theoretically survive several days if something went wrong. This isn't paranoia. This is basic precaution in an environment where something went wrong can escalate to everyone dies with remarkable speed. The ride to the fishing spot takes 20 minutes, the snowmobile's engine roaring against the silence of the frozen landscape. The Indigirka River in winter looks nothing like a river. It's a flat, snow-covered highway of ice stretching into darkness in both directions. The banks are barely distinguishable, marked mainly by scraggly vegetation poking through snow. Jaeger navigates by landmarks invisible to you. A distinctive rock formation here, a particular bend there, knowledge accumulated through decades of observation. He stops at a spot that looks identical to every other spot on the frozen river, kills the engine, and announces, "Here, fish gather near the current, and the current runs strongest right here." You have no idea how he knows this, the ice reveals nothing obvious, but you've learned not to question local expertise. These people read the landscape the way you might read a book, extracting information from details you don't even perceive. The auger comes out, a massive Soviet-era machine that looks like it could drill through bedrock and probably has. Jaeger pulls the starting cord, and it roars to life with a sound that shatters the Arctic silence. The bit bites into ice, churning through layer after layer, ice chips flying in all directions. Even with a motorized auger, it takes nearly 15 minutes to drill through the ice and hit water. 15 minutes of constant drilling through 3 meters of frozen river. The fact that fish survive beneath this is remarkable. The fact that they're active enough to catch is borderline miraculous. Water wells up in the hole, dark and impossibly cold. Jaeger immediately starts setting up the fishing rig, a specialized rod with heavy line and multiple hooks baited with frozen fish pieces. The technique is to jig the line, creating movement that attracts fish, then wait with patience that most modern humans have lost. Sometimes you catch immediately, Jaeger says, dropping the line. Sometimes you wait hours. The fish don't care about your schedule. While waiting, he tells you about the fish species here. The primary catch is omul, a type of whitefish that's adapted to Arctic waters, along with muksun, nelma, and occasionally Arctic cisco. These fish have biological antifreeze in their blood, proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming in their cells even when water temperature drops below normal freezing points. It's evolution at its most pragmatic. Either develop antifreeze or die, and these species chose survival. The fishing is surprisingly productive. Within an hour, Jaeger has pulled up 8 large omul, each one freezing solid within minutes of being removed from the water. They're placed in the tub, where they'll stay frozen until brought home and stored. No need for refrigeration when the ambient temperature is minus 64 degrees Celsius. The entire world is a freezer operating at settings that would make food safety inspectors weep with joy. Between fish, Jaeger talks about changes he's observed. 30 years ago, ice was thicker, sometimes 4 meters. Now it rarely exceeds 3. The freeze comes later, the thaw comes earlier. Old fishing spots don't produce like they used to. We have to adapt, find new locations. This is climate change as experienced by someone whose livelihood depends on reading environmental patterns. He's not debating whether it's happening. He's watching it happen, adjusting his practices in real time. Historians still argue whether indigenous Arctic populations will be able to maintain traditional practices as climate change accelerates, or whether the knowledge systems developed over millennia will become obsolete within a generation or two. Jaeger seems unconcerned with academic debates. Fish are still here, he says pragmatically, just in different places. We learn the new places. What else can we do? Another hunter arrives on a different snowmobile Maxim, a younger man in his 30s. He sets up at a hole about 50 meters away, and the two men work in comfortable silence punctuated by occasional shouted updates. Got a big one. Nice. This is the social structure of Arctic hunting. Parallel solitude, people working individually on shared tasks, connected by purpose rather than constant interaction. Maxim is hunting for larger game as well. He's got a rifle, a heavy caliber weapon designed for elk or occasionally bear, though bears are hibernating now and unlikely to be encountered. Elk hunting in these temperatures is its own challenge. The animals are scarce, wary, and finding them requires tracking skills that border on supernatural. You follow tracks in snow, reading not just the prints but the depth, the spacing, the freshness, the direction, building a mental model of where the animal was going and why. See those tracks? Maxim points to marks in the snow that look like random disturbances to you. Elk, bull, maybe 400 kilograms, passed through yesterday morning heading toward the forest for shelter. He'll be bedded down now, conserving energy. Not worth tracking today, too much effort for low chance of success. But I mark the location, remember it, build knowledge. This is hunting as information gathering, a patient accumulation of data about animal movements, preferences, and patterns. When Maxim eventually takes an elk, it won't be through lucky chance but through the application of months or years of observation, choosing the optimal moment when probability of success justifies the energy expenditure and risk. Food preservation here is admirably simple. Everything freezes. You hunt or fish, you bring the catch home, you put it outside, or in an unheated storage room, and it freezes solid within hours. Bacteria can't grow at -60 degrees Celsius. Decomposition is impossible, and food remains preserved indefinitely. Excavations of ancient settlements in Siberia have found mammoth meat preserved for thousands of years. Still technically edible if you're brave enough to try it. Some scientists have, incidentally, reporting that it tastes like very old, very freezer-burned beef, which is about what you'd expect. Jaeger's tub is nearly full now, about 20 kilograms of frozen fish, enough to feed his family for a week or more. Fish is a staple here, providing protein, omega-3 fatty acids, and calories in a package that's relatively easy to obtain even in winter. The traditional preparation is stroganina, those thin-sliced frozen chips you've encountered before, but fish is also used in soups, grilled when thawed, or smoked during summer for variety. The conversation turns to the Soviet era and food supply. In the old days, we had regular deliveries, Jaeger recalls. Meat, vegetables, canned goods, all subsidized and delivered. When the Soviet Union collapsed, that stopped. Suddenly, we had to be more self-sufficient again, like our grandparents. Some people left because they couldn't adapt. Those who stayed learned to hunt and fish seriously, not just as tradition but as necessity. This pattern repeated across Arctic Russia in the 1990s. Soviet support infrastructure vanished, remote communities had to relearn traditional survival skills that had been partially forgotten during decades of state support, and populations declined as people who couldn't adapt migrated to less harsh environments. Oymykon's population dropped from nearly 2,500 in the 1980s to around 500 today, a decline that tells a story of hardship, adaptation, and the harsh economics of extreme environments. A quirky detail about food culture here: frozen alcohol. Vodka, the stereotypical Russian beverage, has a freezing point around -27 degrees Celsius depending on alcohol content. At -64 degrees Celsius, vodka becomes slushy, viscous, unpleasant. So drinking culture has adapted. Either alcohol is kept indoors where it stays liquid, or preferences shift to lower alcohol beverages, or people just don't drink outdoors because who wants slushy vodka? Maxim checks his watch, a mechanical model because electronic watches can malfunction in extreme cold, their LCD displays becoming sluggish or failing entirely. 4 hours until dark is complete, he notes. Should head back soon. Don't want to navigate in full darkness if we can avoid it. Darkness here isn't just absence of light. It's disorienting, depth perception vanishes, landmarks disappear, and what seemed like a straightforward path becomes a maze of uncertainty. The snowmobiles are loaded, equipment secured, and the group begins the return journey. The temperature has dropped during the afternoon, now -66 degrees Celsius, approaching the point where even experienced locals become cautious. Your face is completely numb despite the layers, and you realize you haven't felt your toes in over an hour. This is concerning but not emergency level. You've been moving enough to maintain circulation, and you'll be indoors soon. Back in the village, the fish are unloaded and distributed. Jaeger keeps about 2/3 for his family, gives the rest to neighbors and relatives. This is the informal economy of Oymyakon. People share surplus, knowing that next week the situation might reverse and they'll be the recipients. It's not charity exactly, it's mutual insurance, a social safety net woven from thousands of small exchanges and reciprocal obligations. Mrs. Vinokurov receives several fish and immediately begins preparing dinner. The fish are too frozen to clean immediately, so they're placed near the stove to thaw partially. Not completely, because partially frozen fish are easier to slice for stroganina. She works with practiced efficiency, the knife flashing through semi-frozen flesh, creating delicate curls of fish that are arranged on a plate with salt and pepper. You try some, and it's strange but not unpleasant, intensely cold, with a clean, fresh taste and a texture somewhere between sashimi and ice cream. Your body recoils slightly from eating something this frozen, but you persist, and soon you're eating with genuine appreciation. This is food perfectly adapted to environment. No cooking required, no preservation needed, just fish maintained at natural Arctic temperature and consumed in a state that would horrify food safety regulators but has sustained people here for centuries. Dinner also includes soup made from earlier catches, fish, potatoes, onions, and copious amounts of butter, all simmered into a rich broth that provides warmth from the inside out. There's bread, thawed and toasted, and tea, always tea, the universal constant. The meal is heavy, high in calories and fat, exactly what your body needs to maintain temperature in this environment. Mr. Vinokurov talks about summer hunting, which is entirely different. In June and July, we hunt waterfowl, ducks, geese that migrate here to breed. We fish in liquid water using nets and traditional techniques. We gather berries, mushrooms, edible plants. 3 months to harvest enough for 9 months. It's exhausting but essential. The seasonal rhythm of life here is extreme. Frantic summer activity gathering and preserving food, followed by long winter months living off those preserved supplies supplemented by winter hunting and fishing. It's a pattern that's probably been repeated since humans first arrived in this region. Only the tools and techniques changing while the fundamental strategy remains constant. After dinner, you step outside briefly and see your breath freeze instantly, creating that whisper of the stars sound again. Above, the sky is beginning to show hints of aurora. Green curtains shimmering at the edge of perception, growing stronger as true darkness settles. The northern lights are common here, a side benefit of high latitude and clear winter skies. You watch for a few minutes, struck by the beauty and the contrast. Above, shimmering celestial light shows created by solar wind interacting with Earth's magnetosphere. Below, frozen landscape and humans clustered around fires, doing what they've done for millennia, surviving, persisting, finding ways to extract life from conditions that should be fatal. Then the cold becomes too much, and you retreat inside, where Mrs. Vinokurov is already preparing tomorrow's meals, rotating frozen items near the stove, planning days ahead because nothing happens quickly here and survival requires constant forethought. Food in Oymyakon isn't fuel. It's strategy, community, tradition, and the accumulated wisdom of generations who learned what grows here, what can be caught, how to preserve it, and how to make it last through the long winter darkness. The morning brings a curious visitor to the village, a historian from Moscow, arriving in a heated van that's been running continuously for the entire 12-hour journey from Yakutsk. His name is Dr. Andrei Volkov, and he's researching Soviet-era population policies in extreme environments. Over tea in the Vinokurov household, he explains why anyone lives in Oymyakon at all, because the answer isn't as obvious as you might think. People didn't spontaneously decide that minus 71 degrees Celsius seemed like a nice place to settle down permanently. The history is complicated. Dr. Volkov begins, warming his hands around a mug of tea despite being indoors. Oymyakon has been used as a stopping point for centuries. Reindeer herders would winter here near the thermal spring, then move on with seasonal migrations. It was never meant to be permanent. Then came the 1920s and 30s, and everything changed. The Soviet government, particularly under Stalin, had specific ideas about how the vast Soviet territory should be populated. Remote regions weren't to be left to indigenous peoples following traditional nomadic patterns. They were to be settled, developed, made productive in ways that fit Soviet economic planning. This wasn't entirely cynical. There was genuine belief that modernization and infrastructure would improve lives. But the implementation was often brutal, and the legacy is deeply mixed. In the 1930s, Oymyakon was designated as a permanent settlement. Nomadic herders were pressured, sometimes forced, to settle. Infrastructure was built. Roads, schools, administrative buildings, a meteorological station. The goal was to establish Soviet presence, extract resources. This region has gold, tin, and other minerals, and integrate indigenous populations into the Soviet system. The fact that this location was astoundingly inhospitable was acknowledged, but not considered a sufficient reason not to proceed. Stalin-era planners had a certain audacity about human capability. Dr. Volkov says carefully, "This is academic speak for, they didn't care much about whether people suffered or died." The road of bones that connects Oymyakon to the outside world was built primarily by Gulag prisoners between 1932 and 1953. The official death toll was never released, but estimates suggest tens of thousands of prisoners died during construction. From cold, starvation, accidents, and the general brutality of forced labor in Arctic conditions. Historians still argue whether the bodies are literally buried in the road's foundation or whether that's metaphorical. What's undeniable is that the road was built with tremendous human cost, and its existence made permanent settlement in Oymyakon viable. Supplies could be delivered, people could travel, theoretically, and the settlement could be maintained as part of the Soviet network rather than being abandoned as impractical. The Cold War added another dimension. Remote Arctic settlements became strategically important locations for early warning systems, weather stations providing data for military and scientific purposes, and symbols of Soviet capability. If we can build thriving communities in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, the logic went, then we can do anything. It demonstrates Soviet superiority. Oymyakon became propaganda, proof that Soviet planning and determination could conquer even the most hostile environments. The population grew during the 1950s through 1980s, reaching its peak of around 2,500. The government provided subsidies, heavily discounted food, fuel, and supplies, higher wages for workers in extreme conditions, regular deliveries of necessities. Housing was built, those sturdy, utilitarian buildings that still stand today, along with the school, medical clinic, power plant, and other infrastructure. For a time, Oymyakon had a certain rough prosperity, supported entirely by state investment. My parents moved here in 1967, Mr. Vinokurov interjects. My father worked at the meteorological station, my mother taught at the school. The pay was good, the community was strong, and yes, it was cold, but we had everything we needed. It wasn't hardship, it was opportunity. His experience represents thousands of similar stories. People who came for work, stayed for community, and built lives in an objectively extreme environment because the support systems made it viable. Then 1991 happened. The Soviet Union collapsed, and with it, the subsidies that made Arctic settlements economically sustainable. Suddenly, Oymyakon wasn't receiving regular supply deliveries. Food prices skyrocketed. Fuel became expensive and scarce. Wages weren't paid for months. The infrastructure began to decay without maintenance. And people started leaving. First a trickle, then a flood, as families realized they couldn't afford to stay in a place where basic survival required resources that were no longer available. The 1990s were desperate, Mrs. Vinokurov recalls. We seriously considered leaving. Many of our friends did, move to Yakutsk, to Moscow, anywhere warmer and more economically viable. But we stayed. This was home. We learned to hunt and fish again. Skills my husband's grandparents had that his parents never needed because the state provided everything. We became more self-sufficient. It was hard, but we survived. The population stabilized around 500 in the early 2000s. The people who remained were those with deep roots, those who couldn't afford to leave, or those who simply refused to abandon their home. The Russian government eventually resumed some support, recognizing that completely abandoning Arctic settlements would look bad and might have strategic implications. But the support is less generous than Soviet times, and Oymyakon exists in a state of managed decline rather than growth. Dr. Volkov pulls out a map showing the distribution of Arctic settlements across Russia. Many have been abandoned entirely, ghost towns scattered across Siberia, buildings collapsing under snow, infrastructure rusting, former homes to thousands now empty and silent. Oymyakon has survived, but its future is uncertain. The question, Dr. Volkov says, is whether maintaining human presence in these extreme environments makes sense without state compulsion or massive subsidies. Can a place like this exist sustainably on its own terms? It's a question without easy answers. Economically, Oymyakon doesn't make sense. The cost of maintaining infrastructure, delivering supplies, and supporting the population far exceeds any economic output. But economics isn't everything. There's cultural value in preserving indigenous knowledge and lifeways. There's the principle that people should be able to live where they choose. There's the geopolitical consideration of maintaining Russian presence across its entire territory. And there's the simple human stubbornness that resists the idea of being driven out by cold. The conversation shifts to a quirky detail, Oymyakon's brief moment of international fame. In the 2010s, journalists discovered the village and descended with cameras and breathless articles about the coldest inhabited place on Earth. Tourism began. A trickle of extreme travelers wanting bragging rights, photographers chasing dramatic images, YouTubers creating content about survival in impossible places. At first, we welcomed it, says Anya, the shopkeeper, who joins the conversation. Tourists meant money, attention, maybe investment. But then we realized they saw us as curiosities, not people. They'd take photos, exclaim about how we could possibly live here, buy a few souvenirs, and leave. They didn't understand that this is just our normal life. She shrugs. Now we tolerate tourism. It brings some income, but it's not going to save the village. Dr. Volkov mentions an ongoing scholarly debate about whether extreme environment settlements represent human resilience or human folly. One camp argues that Oymyakon demonstrates humanity's remarkable adaptability, our ability to thrive anywhere given sufficient knowledge and determination. The other camp suggests these settlements are historical accidents, maintained by inertia and misguided policy, and would be better abandoned in favor of concentrating populations in more viable locations. Both sides miss the point, Mr. Vinokurov says firmly. We're not here to prove anything or demonstrate anything. We're here because we're here. This is our home. My grandparents are buried in that frozen cemetery. My children were born in that hospital. I know every family in this village. Where would I go where I'd have that? Moscow? I'd be nobody in Moscow. Here I matter. Here, I know my place and my purpose. It's a powerful argument for the value of place, community, and identity that transcends economic calculation or outside judgment. And yet, the school has only 70 students now. The youngest residents are leaving for education and jobs, and many don't return. The average age in Oymyakon is rising. Without young families, the village's future is measured in decades, not centuries. The Soviet legacy is visible everywhere in Oymyakon. The architecture, the infrastructure, the settlement pattern itself. But there's also a pre-Soviet legacy, the Saka people who were here long before Russians arrived, who have their own languages, traditions, and ways of understanding this landscape. The intersection of these legacies creates the modern village. Russian-speaking but culturally Saka, using Soviet infrastructure but maintaining traditional practices, caught between past and future with an uncertain present. Dr. Volkov is recording oral histories, trying to document the lived experience of Soviet Arctic settlement before the generation that remembers it directly is gone. In 30 years, all the primary sources will be dead, he says bluntly. We'll have documents and statistics, but we'll lose the human dimension, what it felt like, what motivated people, how they understood their own lives. That's what I'm trying to preserve. One story he's collected particularly interests you. During the height of Soviet support, Oymyakon had a cinema, an actual movie theater, showing Soviet films and occasionally foreign ones, providing entertainment in the long dark winters. It closed in the 1990s, the building now used for storage, but elderly residents speak fondly of watching films while outside the temperature plunged to -70 degrees Celsius. It seems almost absurd, a cinema in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. But it happened, proof that human desire for culture, entertainment, and connection persists even in the most extreme circumstances. The afternoon brings news via satellite internet, a government announcement about infrastructure investment in Arctic regions. It's vague, promising modernization and sustainable development, the kind of language that might mean genuine help or might mean nothing at all. The residents are skeptical. "We've heard this before," Anya says. "They promise investment, nothing changes, we continue. Our survival doesn't depend on government promises. It depends on us." This self-reliance, forged through the brutal 1990s when state support vanished, is now a point of pride. Oymyakon doesn't wait for help. It solves its own problems. The power plant is maintained through local expertise and improvisation. Food comes from hunting, fishing, and expensive deliveries that residents pool money to afford. Social services are provided by community members who step up because someone has to. There's a kind of anarchist paradise in this, if you squint. A community functioning largely independent of state control, organizing collectively, making decisions through consensus, supporting each member through mutual aid. Of course, it's born of necessity rather than ideology, and most residents would probably prefer reliable state services to noble self-sufficiency. But there's something admirable in how Oymyakon has persisted not because of government support but despite its absence. As evening settles, which is to say, as the perpetual twilight darkens slightly, Dr. Volkov prepares to leave. He's collected interviews, photographs, documents. He'll return to Moscow, write his academic papers, present at conferences. Oymyakon will become data, analysis, footnotes. The people here will continue living their lives, largely unaffected by how they're portrayed in scholarly literature. You ask Mr. Vinokurov if he ever regrets staying. He thinks for a long moment. Regret? Sometimes. When my joints ache from the cold, when I hear about my friends who left living comfortable lives in warm cities, when another young person graduates and moves away. Yes, sometimes I wonder what if. But then I step outside on a clear night and see the stars like you've never seen them in a city, bright and infinite. I hear the silence that's so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. I know that tomorrow I'll see Pyotr and Anya and everyone else I've known for 40 years. And I think this is enough. This difficult, frozen, stubborn life is enough. It's not a ringing endorsement of Arctic settlement policy. It's not a triumph of human spirit narrative. It's something more honest and complex. The acknowledgement that life here is hard, often senseless by outside standards, yet meaningful to those who live it. Oymyakon exists because people choose to make it exist, day after day, in the face of cold that should be impossible and economics that don't add up and futures that seem uncertain. The Soviet Union wanted to prove that humans could conquer any environment. What Oymyakon actually proves is more subtle. Humans can persist almost anywhere, but not through conquest, through adaptation, community, and the stubborn insistence on calling a place home even when that place is trying very hard to kill you. Dr. Volkov's visit has prompted Mrs. Vinokurov to share something she rarely discusses: her father's medical research from the 1970s. He was a physician stationed in Oymyakon, studying how the human body adapts to extreme cold over long-term exposure. She retrieves a worn notebook from a drawer. Its pages yellowed, but the handwriting's still clear. "He documented everything," she says. "Heart rates, blood composition, metabolic changes. He was fascinated by how we don't just survive here, we physiologically transform. You're sitting in the warm kitchen, but the subject matter makes you acutely aware of your own body's struggle against the cold outside. Even indoors, you've noticed changes over the past few days. You're constantly hungry, eating quantities that would horrify you in normal circumstances. Your hands and feet seem perpetually cold despite layers. Your skin has become dry and tight, cracking at the knuckles and lips despite liberal application of petroleum jelly. These are minor adaptations, surface-level responses to environmental stress. The residents of Oymyakon display something much deeper. Mrs. Vinokurov's father documented that long-term residents develop increased metabolic rates. Their bodies burn calories faster, generating more internal heat. This happens gradually, over months and years, as cellular mechanisms adjust to constant cold stress. The thyroid gland becomes more active, pumping out hormones that regulate metabolism. Mitochondria, the cellular powerhouses, become more numerous and efficient, extracting more energy from food to fuel the constant demand for heat production. He measured his own basal metabolic rate when he arrived in 1968 and again 5 years later, Mrs. Vinokurov reads from the notebook. It had increased by nearly 18%. He was burning significantly more calories just sitting still than he had in Moscow. This explains the diet here, the heavy reliance on fat, butter, meat, and dense carbohydrates. It's not cultural preference. It's biological necessity. Bodies operating in constant thermal overdrive require massive fuel input. Blood composition changes too. Red blood cell count increases. More cells to carry more oxygen to tissues working overtime to generate heat. The blood itself thickens slightly, becoming more viscous. This is potentially dangerous. Thicker blood increases risk of clots and cardiovascular problems. But it's also adaptive, ensuring efficient oxygen delivery when every cellular process is running at elevated rates. The body is constantly making trade-offs, accepting increased long-term risks to manage immediate survival demands. One particularly fascinating finding: residents develop enhanced peripheral blood flow control. In cold environments, the normal response is vasoconstriction. Blood vessels in extremities constrict to preserve core body temperature, which is why fingers and toes get cold first. But chronic cold exposure leads to a more sophisticated response. The body learns to periodically dilate peripheral blood vessels even in extreme cold, sending warming pulses to extremities to prevent tissue damage, then constricting again to preserve core heat. It's called cold-induced vasodilation, and it's why experienced Arctic residents have lower frostbite rates than newcomers despite similar exposure. My father called it the Arctic pulse, Mrs. Vinokurov says. He could measure it, cyclical changes in finger temperature even when ambient temperature stayed constant. The body learns to protect itself more intelligently. This isn't conscious control. It's automatic physiological adaptation developing over months of exposure, the autonomic nervous system recalibrating its responses to new normal conditions. Respiratory systems adapt as well. You've noticed that everyone here breathes in a particular way outdoors. Shallow breaths through the nose, never deep gulps through the mouth. This isn't just technique. It's trained physiology. Nasal passages become more efficient at warming incoming air. Mucous membranes thicken to provide better insulation, and lung tissue develops tolerance for colder air that would trigger bronchospasm in unadapted individuals. Historians still argue whether these adaptations are purely physiological or if there's a genetic component, whether generations of Saka people living in Arctic conditions have evolved specific genetic traits that make cold adaptation easier. Research suggests both factors are at work. Certain populations show higher frequencies of genes associated with cold tolerance and efficient metabolism, but much of the adaptation still occurs through phenotypic plasticity, the body's ability to modify its function in response to environmental pressure. You mentioned that you've been sleeping more here, often 10 or 11 hours per night instead of your usual 7 or 8. Mrs. Vinokurov nods knowingly. That's normal. Your body needs the rest. Sleep is when repair happens, when metabolic adjustments are consolidated. New arrivals often sleep 12 or even 14 hours per day for the first few weeks. Your body is working very hard, even when you're not doing anything. Skin undergoes changes too. The dry, cracked condition you've noticed is just the beginning. Long-term residents develop thicker skin, literally measurably thicker, with enhanced lipid layers that provide better insulation. Sebaceous glands become more active, producing oils that protect against moisture loss and cold damage. It's evolution on fast forward, the body reshaping itself to match environmental demands. One quirky detail from the notebook: Mrs. Vinokurov's father documented that women seem to adapt more efficiently than men in certain ways. They maintained core temperature better, showed less decline in manual dexterity in cold conditions, and reported fewer subjective feelings of discomfort. This aligns with modern research showing that women often have more even distribution of subcutaneous fat, providing better insulation and higher pain tolerance for cold exposure. There are hormonal factors too. Estrogen appears to play roles in cold adaptation that aren't fully understood even now. The conversation shifts to children and how young bodies adapt. Kids born here are different from adults who move here, Mrs. Vinokurov explains. Their development happens entirely in cold conditions, so adaptations are even more profound. Their metabolism is naturally higher. Their cold tolerance is remarkable. I've seen 5-year-olds playing outside in -60 degrees Celsius, completely comfortable, while adult visitors are suffering in the same conditions. This raises interesting questions about developmental plasticity, whether exposure during critical growth periods creates permanent adaptations that can't be achieved through adult exposure alone. Some research suggests yes. Children who grow up in high-altitude environments develop larger lung capacity and more efficient oxygen utilization than adults who move to altitude later. Similar principles might apply to cold adaptation, though the research is less extensive. There are downsides to these adaptations. The accelerated metabolism that keeps you warm also accelerates aging. Cardiovascular systems under constant stress show earlier wear. Joint problems are common. The cold makes cartilage less flexible, and years of working in extreme temperatures take their toll. Life expectancy in Arctic regions is generally lower than in temperate zones, though disentangling the effects of cold from other factors like healthcare access and lifestyle is complex. Mr. Vinokurov joins the conversation, mentioning his own experiences. When I travel to Yakutsk in summer, I overheat easily. Inside buildings, I'm constantly sweating. My body is calibrated for cold. It doesn't know how to handle normal temperatures anymore. I'm most comfortable around 10 degrees Celsius, which most people would find chilly. My room temperature is different from yours. This is a profound example of physiological adaptation. The body's thermoneutral zone, the temperature range where you're comfortable without expending energy to heat or cool, shifts entirely. What feels neutral and comfortable becomes environmentally determined. Residents of Oymyakon are literally built differently than people from temperate zones, their baseline physiology altered by chronic cold exposure. Immune function is another area of adaptation and concern. The extreme cold kills many pathogens. Bacteria and viruses that thrive in warm environments can't survive -60 degrees Celsius. This means residents have lower exposure to many infectious diseases. But it also means their immune systems don't get the constant low-level challenges that keep defenses sharp. When residents travel to warmer regions, they often get sick more frequently than locals, their immune systems overwhelmed by pathogen exposures they're not accustomed to handling. There's also psychological adaptation, though it's harder to measure than physiological changes. Residents develop what might be called cold habituation, not just tolerance but a fundamental shift in how cold is perceived and processed. The distress response that makes newcomers panic in extreme cold diminishes. The constant vigilance becomes automatic rather than consciously stressful. It's similar to how people living in dangerous areas develop habituation that allows normal life to continue despite objective risks. Mrs. Vinokurov mentions seasonal affective disorder, depression triggered by lack of sunlight. It's common here, especially in January and February when daylight is minimal. My father prescribed vitamin D supplements, encouraged people to use bright lights indoors, suggested staying socially active. But some people struggle every winter, a deep sadness that only lifts when the sun returns. Modern research has validated these observations. Lack of sunlight disrupts circadian rhythms, reduces serotonin production, and can trigger genuine clinical depression. The body's response to darkness includes melatonin changes, the hormone that regulates sleep-wake cycles. In normal conditions, melatonin rises at night and falls during day. But when day is only 3 hours of dim twilight, the signal becomes confused. Some residents develop irregular sleep patterns, sleeping in short bursts rather than single consolidated periods. Others become chronically fatigued, their bodies never quite sure when it's time to be awake or asleep. One particularly interesting finding from the notebook: cold exposure appears to activate brown adipose tissue, a special type of fat that generates heat rather than storing energy. Infants have significant brown fat to help regulate temperature, but it typically decreases with age. However, residents of extreme cold environments show higher retention of brown fat into adulthood, and even generation of new brown fat deposits. This tissue is metabolically active, burning calories to produce warmth, and represents yet another adaptation that makes cold survival more efficient. My father wondered if these adaptations could be induced artificially, Mrs. Vinokurov says. Could you give someone medications or treatments that would trigger the same changes without requiring years of cold exposure? It would have applications for Arctic workers, military personnel, explorers. But his research ended when we left Oymyakon in 1989, and I don't know if anyone followed up. The question touches on the broader field of human enhancement and environmental adaptation. If we understand the mechanisms by which bodies adapt to extreme cold, could we accelerate or amplify those adaptations? It's not purely theoretical. Athletes train at high altitude to trigger adaptations that improve performance, and similar principles might apply to cold adaptation. But the ethics become complex quickly. Should we modify human physiology to fit hostile environments rather than creating better protective technology? As the conversation winds down, you're struck by the realization that the people around you are, in measurable biological ways, different from you. Their hearts beat differently, their blood flows differently, their cells burn fuel differently. Their bodies are constructed to exist in conditions that yours fundamentally isn't. They're still human, obviously, but they're humans who've been reshaped by their environment in ways both subtle and profound. Mrs. Vinokurov closes the notebook carefully. My father's last entry was interesting, she says. He wrote, "After 10 years here, I realize I'm no longer studying adaptation. I am adaptation. Every measurement I take of others, I see in myself. We are all becoming people of the cold, transformed whether we intended it or not. The question isn't whether the body can adapt. The question is what we lose in the adaptation and whether it's worth the cost." It's a haunting thought, and there's no clear answer. The residents of Oymyakon have gained the ability to survive in impossible conditions, but they've also accepted accelerated aging, increased health risks, and fundamental alterations to how their bodies function. Is it worth it? That depends on whether you measure worth in years of life, quality of existence, cultural preservation, personal choice, or some combination of all these factors. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 68 degrees Celsius. Inside, your body continues its own small adaptations, learning slowly, reluctantly, how to exist in a place that evolution never prepared you for. You're not transforming like the long-term residents, but you're changing nonetheless, your physiology stretching to accommodate demands it was never designed to meet. And in that struggle, that constant biological negotiation between body and environment, you glimpse something fundamental about human existence. We are not fixed, static creatures. We are endlessly adaptive, our bodies capable of remarkable transformations when pressed by necessity. The people of Oymyakon are living proof that humans can remake themselves to survive almost anywhere. Whether they should have to is another question entirely. The sun has set, though set implies it rose meaningfully, which at this time of year is generous, and the village settles into its evening rhythm. This is when Oymyakon truly comes alive in its own peculiar way, when the work of surviving the day transitions into the work of preparing for tomorrow, and when the social fabric of the community weaves itself tighter against the encroaching darkness and cold. You're invited to the community center, a squat building painted an optimistic blue that's faded to something closer to gray. Inside, it's warm, almost uncomfortably, so after the minus 67 degrees Celsius outside, and filled with people. Tonight is what Mrs. Vinokurov calls gathering night, an informal tradition where residents come together for conversation, tea, and the simple pleasure of not being alone in the long Arctic night. There's no formal agenda, no organized activities, just people existing together in warmth and light. The room is arranged with tables and chairs clustered in small groups, and a large samovar, a traditional Russian tea urn, occupies a place of honor on a central table, constantly producing hot water for the endless consumption of tea. Children run between the groups, their energy seemingly unaffected by the fact that they've been awake since dawn and have already walked to and from school in temperatures that would incapacitate most adults. Pyotr is here, still wearing his perpetually oil-stained work clothes, arguing good-naturedly with another man about the best method for preventing diesel fuel from gelling. "You add kerosene," Pyotr insists. 10% kerosene to 90% diesel. keeps it liquid to minus 70 degrees Celsius. His companion disagrees. Kerosene is expensive. Better to keep the vehicle running continuously. More reliable. This debate has probably been ongoing for decades, with no resolution in sight because both methods work and both have drawbacks. Anya, the shopkeeper, is discussing supply logistics with a group of women. The next truck from Yakutsk is delayed. Mechanical problems. Naturally, because vehicles breaking down at minus 60 degrees Celsius is as certain as sunrise, and she's trying to figure out how to ration current supplies until the delivery arrives. We have enough tea for 2 weeks, maybe 3 if people use less, she's saying. But flour is running low. We might need to bake less frequently. The women nod, already mentally adjusting their meal plans. This is the unglamorous reality of Arctic living. Constant calculation about resources, perpetual awareness of what's available and what's running short, and the understanding that you can't just pop to another store if this one runs out. Scarcity isn't a theoretical concern. It's a practical constraint that shapes daily decisions. A group of older men sit in one corner, speaking in Saka, their conversation punctuated by laughter and occasional gestures toward the window where the darkness presses against the glass. You catch fragments translated by someone nearby. They're telling hunting stories, comparing past winters, reminiscing about people who've left or died. This is oral history in action, the transmission of knowledge and memory through storytelling, a tradition that predates writing and continues because it serves social functions that written records can't. One story catches your attention, an account of the winter of 1978, when temperatures dropped to minus 72 degrees Celsius for 3 consecutive days and the village's power plant nearly failed. We thought we'd have to evacuate, one man recalls. But where would we go? The roads were impassable. The cold would kill anyone trying to travel. So we gathered all the children in the school, brought in extra stoves, burned everything we could for warmth. Adults rotated shifts keeping the fires going. For 3 days, we didn't sleep, didn't do anything except maintain heat and wait for the temperature to rise. The fact that they survived is testament to both luck and collective effort. But several people developed severe frostbite, one man lost all his toes, and an elderly woman died from a heart attack likely triggered by the stress. The story isn't told triumphantly. It's told as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even with preparation and experience, the cold can still win. Historians still argue whether maintaining settlements in such extreme environments is ethical, given the constant risk and the resources required for survival. But the people here don't frame it as an ethical question. It's simply where they live, and living requires vigilance and mutual support. The alternative, abandonment, is discussed theoretically but feels impossible emotionally. The children have organized a game in the corner, some variation of tag that involves much running and shrieking. Their presence is important beyond the obvious. They represent continuity, the possibility that Oymyakon has a future. But there are only about 20 children here tonight, and you remember the school enrollment numbers, 70 students total. This is a village aging and shrinking, each generation smaller than the last. A young couple sits slightly apart, the woman noticeably pregnant. You learn this is Sasha and Dmitry, both in their late 20s, expecting their first child in March. March in Oymyakon means temperatures around minus 40 degrees Celsius to minus 50 degrees Celsius, still brutally cold, and you can't help wondering about the logistics of childbirth in such an environment. Sasha catches your expression and laughs. We have a clinic, she says. It's small, but the midwife is experienced. And if there are complications, we can evacuate to Yakutsk, weather permitting. That last phrase, weather permitting, hangs heavy. What happens if complications arise during a blizzard when the road is impassable? The answer is uncomfortable. They manage with available resources, and sometimes that's not enough. Infant mortality rates in remote Arctic regions are higher than national averages, though modern communication technology has improved outcomes by allowing consultations with distant specialists via satellite internet. Dmitry mentions that they've been preparing for months, stockpiling supplies, making arrangements with neighbors for support, ensuring their home is as warm and secure as possible. Our grandparents did this without electricity or modern medicine, he says. We have advantages they didn't. We'll be fine. There's confidence in his voice, but also an underlying tension. Becoming a parent is anxiety-inducing anywhere. Doing it in the coldest inhabited place on Earth adds layers of concern that most people never consider. The conversation shifts to entertainment and how people occupy themselves during the long dark months. Television is available via satellite, though the signal can be unreliable during storms. Internet exists but is slow and expensive, mainly used for communication and essential tasks rather than recreation. Books are popular, passed from hand to hand until they're falling apart, then carefully repaired with tape and glue. One shelf in the community center holds the village's informal library, maybe 200 books in Russian and Sakha, ranging from Soviet-era classics to recent thrillers. We read a lot, Sasha confirms. What else is there to do? It's dark, it's cold, you can't go outside for long periods. Reading, talking, drinking tea, playing cards. These are the entertainments. She pauses. And gossip. So much gossip. In a village of 500 people, everyone knows everything about everyone. Can be suffocating, but it also creates closeness. You can't hide, can't pretend to be something you're not. Everyone sees you, knows you, and somehow that's comforting. This intimacy is a double-edged sword. Privacy is nearly impossible. Personal business becomes community knowledge. Conflicts can't be avoided through anonymity. But it also means no one suffers alone. Everyone's struggles are visible and supported. And the social isolation that plagues urban life is largely absent. You're always part of a community that notices if you're struggling and intervenes. Sometimes helpfully, sometimes intrusively. Music starts from a corner where someone has brought out a guitar, a battered instrument that's been in the village for decades, played by generations of residents. The musician is a middle-aged man named Sergei, and he begins playing traditional Sakha melodies, songs that predate Soviet settlement, that carry the weight of ancestors who survived in this landscape through knowledge, skill, and stubborn endurance. People begin singing. Not everyone, not in unison, but gradually voices join in, harmonizing imperfectly but with genuine feeling. The songs are about reindeer, about journeys across frozen land, about longing for summer warmth, about love and loss and the eternal struggle against the cold. You don't understand all the words. Some are in Sakha, some in Russian dialects you're unfamiliar with, but the emotional content transcends language. This is culture, living and breathing, being actively maintained through practice rather than preserved in museums. Every time these songs are sung, every time this community gathers, they're enacting traditions that connect them to the past and create meaning in the present. It's not performative, not done for outsiders. It's done for themselves because it matters, because it's who they are. A quirky detail emerges during a conversation break. The village has a tradition of cold competitions during the worst weeks of winter. Who can retrieve an object from outside fastest? Who can work on a vehicle engine longest in -70 degrees Celsius? Who can accurately predict when the first crack of dawn will appear? These aren't official events with prizes. They're informal challenges that add levity to harsh conditions and create stories that get retold for years. Last year, Piotr bet he could change a tire in -68 degrees Celsius in under 10 minutes. Someone recalls. Made it in 12 minutes, but his hands were so frozen he couldn't feel them for 3 hours afterward. Stubborn fool. Piotr grins, unrepentant. Still did it though. This is masculine posturing adapted to Arctic conditions, proving toughness not through physical fights but through endurance of cold. As the evening progresses, you notice the careful attention to time. People check watches, glance toward the door, calculate how long they've been away from home. No one stays too late because returning home means venturing into -67 degrees Celsius darkness, and while the distances are short, the consequences of mistakes are severe. Around 9 p.m., people begin the ritual of bundling up, preparing for the journey home. Children are wrapped by parents with meticulous care. Every gap sealed, every layer checked, scarves positioned precisely. Couples leave together, neighbors coordinate to walk in groups. No one goes alone if it can be avoided. The community center empties gradually, people stepping out into the night in small clusters, their flashlight beams creating small islands of visibility in the vast darkness. You walk back with the Vinokurovs, following a path worn smooth by countless journeys. The stars above are extraordinary, unpolluted by artificial light, undimmed by atmospheric haze. They appear in impossible numbers, so bright and close you feel you could reach up and grab them. The aurora has strengthened, green ribbons dancing across the sky, occasionally touched with purple and red at the edges. Beautiful, isn't it? Mrs. Vinokurov says, her voice muffled by her scarf. This is why we stay. Not just this, she gestures at the aurora, but everything. The community, the land, the life we've built. It's hard, yes. Dangerous, certainly, but it's ours. We know every person in that room tonight. We've shared meals, celebrated births, mourned deaths together. Where else would I have that? Back inside the Vinokurov home, the evening routine begins. Checking that the stove has enough fuel for the night, arranging tomorrow's frozen food near the heat to thaw, ensuring water supplies are adequate, laying out clothing for the morning. These tasks are performed with practiced efficiency, the choreography of survival refined through repetition. Mr. Vinokurov mentions that tomorrow he needs to check on the pregnant mare again. If she goes into labor, I'll need to be there. Foaling in these temperatures is risky. The colt could freeze before it's even fully born. But horses have done this for thousands of years here. Nature finds ways. It's a statement of faith in biological resilience, tempered by pragmatic awareness that not every birth succeeds. You settle into your sleeping area, a corner of the main room separated by a curtain, warmed by proximity to the stove. The temperature inside is probably around 10 degrees Celsius, which by Oymyakon standards is cozy, though you're still wearing thermal layers under your blankets. Outside, the thermometer reads -68 degrees Celsius. That 78-degree differential is maintained by wood burning in a stove, by walls insulated with whatever materials were available, by windows sealed against infiltration, and by constant human attention. As you drift toward sleep, you can hear the village around you. The distant rumble of the power plant, the occasional bark of a dog, the creak and groan of buildings contracting in the cold. These are the sounds of human presence in a place that should be empty, the acoustic signature of stubborn persistence against overwhelming odds. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges. Cold to be endured, water to be gathered, food to be prepared, work to be done. And the day after, and the day after that, through the long winter months until spring's brief respite arrives. This is the rhythm of life at -71 degrees Celsius. Not dramatic or heroic, but steady, repetitive, and sustained through collective effort and individual determination. The darkness presses against the windows, the cold waits outside, and inside, people sleep, dream, and prepare to face another day in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. The days have blurred together now. You've lost count of exactly how long you've been in Oymyakon, though the calendar insists it's been nearly 2 weeks. 2 weeks of -60 degrees Celsius to -70 degrees Celsius temperatures, of darkness punctuated by brief twilight, of constant cold that's become almost normalized in your perception. Your body has started its own small adaptations. You no longer shiver as violently, your appetite has stabilized at a consistently high level, and you've developed the locals' habit of shallow breathing through your nose even indoors. Tonight is different, though. The temperature has dropped to -71 degrees Celsius, matching the record low from 1924, though as Mr. Vinokurov points out, the record is probably wrong. We've had colder, but the thermometers couldn't measure it. You can't record what breaks your instruments. The village has taken on a hushed quality, as if even the buildings are holding their breath against the extreme cold. You're sitting by the window in the Vinokurov home, watching ice crystals form on the inside of the triple-pane glass despite the stove burning steadily nearby. These crystals create elaborate fractal patterns, tiny forests of frozen geometry that catch the lamplight and glow with soft luminescence. In another context, they'd be beautiful. Here, they're a reminder that the barrier between warmth and death is measured in centimeters of glass and wood. Mrs. Vinokurov is darning socks, an activity that seems almost quaintly domestic until you remember that holes in socks at these temperatures can lead to frostbite. Nothing is trivial here. Every detail of daily life carries potential consequences. She works by lamplight, her needle moving in practiced rhythms, and occasionally she looks up to check the stove or glance toward the window where darkness presses against the glass. "Do you understand now?" she asks quietly. "Why we live this way?" It's not accusatory. She's genuinely curious whether your time here has provided insight or just deepened your confusion about how anyone chooses this existence. You consider the question carefully. Understanding feels too strong. You've glimpsed the shape of life here, seen its rhythms and demands, but truly understanding would require years, maybe generations. What you've gained is something else. Appreciation, perhaps, or respect for the sheer complexity of knowledge required to survive. Every resident of Oymyakon carries encyclopedic information about cold, about ice, about their environment that you're only beginning to perceive. "I understand that it's not simple," you offer. "I came expecting either misery or romantic resilience, but it's neither. It's just life. Complicated, difficult, but still fundamentally ordinary life happening under extraordinary conditions." Mrs. Vinokurov nods, seeming satisfied with this answer. People always want extremes. We're either suffering or we're heroes, but we're just people who live where it's very cold. Some days are hard, some days are fine, most days are somewhere in between. Like everywhere, I imagine. Outside, a dog barks. One of the hardy Saka lycus that serve as guards, companions, and occasionally food sources in desperate times. The bark sounds different in this cold, sharper and flatter, as if the air itself is too frozen to carry sound properly. Another dog answers from across the village, and for a moment there's a canine conversation happening in -71°C darkness, life asserting itself against conditions designed to prevent it. Mr. Vinokurov enters, bringing a blast of cold air that makes the stove's flames flicker. "The mare foaled," he announces, stomping snow from his boots. "Colt, healthy, already standing. Mother is fine." There's relief and satisfaction in his voice. Birth in these conditions is always uncertain, always dangerous, and success feels like a small victory against the cold's constant pressure. "In this temperature?" Mrs. Vinokurov sounds concerned. "How did?" "I brought them into the stable's warmest corner, hung blankets to block drafts, kept the stove burning high. The colt was shaking, covered in amniotic fluid that was freezing on contact with air. But the mare cleaned him quickly, and he found his feet within 20 minutes. Strong bloodline, that one." He warms his hands near the stove, and you notice they're red and swollen despite his heavy gloves. Even brief exposure to -71°C while helping with the birth has caused damage that will take days to heal. This is perhaps the most profound lesson of Oymyakon. Life persists. Not easily, not without cost, but with stubborn determination that defies logic. A colt born in -71°C weather should die within minutes, but through human intervention and animal resilience and sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept the cold's verdict, it lives. This pattern repeats endlessly. Children born, crops grown during the brief summer, relationships formed, communities maintained, all in the face of an environment that seems designed to prevent exactly these things. The conversation turns to the future, as it often does during long evenings. Sasha and Dmitri's baby is due in 2 months. The school needs repairs that probably won't happen. The power plant requires parts that may or may not arrive before something critical fails. The road to Yakutsk needs maintenance that depends on government funding that depends on political priorities that feel very distant from this frozen village. "We might not be here in 50 years, Mr. Vinokurov says matter-of-factly. "The young people leave, the old people die, and eventually there aren't enough people to maintain the infrastructure. The power plant fails, the village evacuates, and Oymyakon becomes another ghost town." He doesn't sound particularly distressed by this possibility. It's stated as observable fact, not tragedy. "But maybe not," Mrs. Vinokurov counters. "Maybe the climate continues warming and this becomes more livable. Maybe tourism brings enough money to sustain us. Maybe someone discovers resources that make settlement economically viable. We can't know." Her tone carries neither optimism nor pessimism, just acknowledgement of uncertainty. Historians still argue whether the end of extreme environment settlements is inevitable or whether they'll adapt and persist in new forms. Oymyakon might transition from permanent residence to seasonal occupation, or become a research station, or maintain a small core population, or completely empty. All these futures are possible, and none of the residents can control which one manifests. You think about Dr. Volkov and his oral history project, trying to preserve knowledge before it vanishes. There's something melancholy about that impulse, the recognition that this way of life might not survive, that future generations might look at Oymyakon as a historical curiosity rather than a living community. And yet, the same could be said for countless human settlements throughout history. Places that seemed permanent vanished. Ways of life that seemed eternal evolved or disappeared. Oymyakon is not unique in its impermanence, only in its extreme environment. The stove crackles, sending up sparks that die quickly in the air. Mrs. Vinokurov finishes her darning and sets aside the socks. Mr. Vinokurov checks the fuel supply, adding logs that will burn through the night, maintaining the fragile bubble of warmth that keeps this household alive. Outside, the temperature holds steady at -71°C, the coldest reading in years, and the village endures it the way it endures everything. Through preparation, community, and the accumulated wisdom of those who've survived before. A peculiar thought occurs to you. Everywhere on Earth was once extreme environment for humans. Before clothing, before fire, before shelter, the entire planet was hostile. Early humans survived not through biological adaptation alone, were not particularly well designed for any environment, but through knowledge, technology, and social cooperation. Oymyakon represents the strategy taken to its logical extreme. Humans living where we absolutely should not be able to live, through nothing but accumulated knowledge and collective effort. In that sense, Oymyakon isn't an outlier, it's a concentrated example of how humans have always survived. The cold just makes it more obvious, strips away the illusion that we're naturally suited to our environments. You're not adapted to your temperate home city either. You survive there through infrastructure, technology, social systems, and knowledge you didn't personally develop. Oymyakon just makes the dependency more visible. The evening winds down with tea, always tea, and quiet conversation that drifts across topics without urgency or agenda. Mrs. Vinokurov mentions a wedding planned for March, when temperatures will be merely -40°C and therefore suitable for celebration. Mr. Vinokurov talks about spring plans, the brief frantic months when everything needs to happen. Fishing in liquid water, gathering materials, making repairs, preparing for the next winter before this one is even fully ended. You notice the careful attention to seasons, the way residents think always in cycles, in preparation, in the constant awareness that conditions will change and you must be ready. Nothing happens spontaneously here. Everything requires forethought measured in weeks or months. This creates a particular relationship with time. Less focus on immediate gratification, more emphasis on long-term planning and delayed rewards. Around 10 p.m., the household begins its nightly preparations. Checking door seals, ensuring window coverings are secure, arranging the stove for overnight burning, laying out clothing for morning. These rituals have taken on a meditative quality through repetition, performed with focused attention that borders on reverence. This is the liturgy of survival, enacted nightly, the small ceremonies that maintain life in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. You settle into your sleeping area, wrapped in layers that have become familiar. Thermal underwear, wool socks, a heavy sweater, all beneath thick blankets that still feel inadequate. The stove provides heat, but the cold radiates through walls, through floors, through every gap and crack. A constant presence that never relents. Outside, the aurora has strengthened again, painting the sky with curtains of green and purple light that shimmer and dance in silence. The phenomenon is caused by solar wind particles colliding with Earth's magnetosphere, creating light through electromagnetic interactions that happen hundreds of kilometers overhead. But from down here, in the dark and cold, it just looks like magic. The sky itself coming alive, moving with purpose and beauty that defies the harsh conditions below. The village sleeps, or most of it does. Someone's generator continues its steady rumble. The power plant maintains its endless operation. A light shows in one window where perhaps someone is sick or can't sleep, or is keeping watch for reasons known only to them. These small signs of wakefulness are comforting, proof that you're not alone in the vast frozen darkness. Your mind drifts, thoughts becoming less coherent as sleep approaches. You think about the colt born tonight, standing on shaky legs in a stable while outside the temperature could freeze exposed flesh in under a minute. You think about the children at school, learning algebra and literature in a place where pencils break from cold. You think about Piotr's eternal battle with his aging van, about Anya rationing flour in her shop, about the hunter reading ice for safe crossing points, about the teacher helping students bundle up for the journey home. These are not headlines or statistics or dramatic survival stories. They're ordinary moments in extraordinary circumstances, daily life proceeding with mundane complexity despite conditions that should make it impossible. This is the true story of Oymyakon, not the record-breaking temperature or the extreme location, but the accumulated small decisions, actions, and interactions that allow human community to persist where it has no business existing. The darkness deepens, though in midwinter Oymyakon, deepens is somewhat relative. It's been dark for hours and will stay dark for many more. Your breathing slows, consciousness fading at the edges, and the last thing you're aware of is the gentle hiss of the stove, the quiet breathing of the Vinokurovs in their corner of the room, and the profound silence of the frozen world outside. In sleep, you dream not of warmth or escape, but of this place. Of ice crystals catching light, of breath freezing midair, of children walking to school through darkness, of reindeer pawing through snow for food, of communities gathering around tea and songs, of life persisting through sheer stubborn determination in the face of cold that should be absolute. And when morning comes, though morning is a generous term for the brief twilight that passes for daylight here, you'll wake to the same challenges. The cold to be managed, the water to be obtained, the food to be prepared, the connections to be maintained. Another day in Oymyakon, another day of ordinary life in the most extraordinary place, another day of humans doing what they've always done. Surviving, adapting, and finding meaning in circumstances that defy easy explanation. The temperature outside remains minus 71 degrees Celsius, matching records from a century ago, proof that some things change while others remain constant. The cold is eternal, patient, indifferent, but inside these small buildings, gathered around fires and shared meals and collective memory, warmth persists. Not just thermal warmth, but human warmth, the heat generated by connection and purpose and the refusal to surrender to the darkness. As your consciousness fully releases into sleep, one final thought crystallizes. Resilience isn't about individual toughness or heroic endurance. It's about networks of mutual support, accumulated knowledge passed between generations, the thousand small preparations that prevent disasters, and the quiet commitment to continue existing in places where existence shouldn't be possible. This is Oymyakon. This is life at minus 71 degrees Celsius. This is humanity stripped to its essential elements: knowledge, community, and the stubborn insistence on survival against all reasonable odds. The stove's warmth has settled into something gentle now, a steady presence rather than urgent necessity. Outside, the night continues its slow progression, not toward dawn exactly, because dawn is still hours away and will bring only dim twilight when it arrives, but toward whatever tomorrow holds. The temperature remains brutal, the darkness complete, but inside this small space, life continues its quiet rhythms. You're aware, in that half-conscious state between waking and sleep, of how much has changed in these 2 weeks. The cold that once seemed impossible now feels merely extremely difficult. The darkness that was disorienting has become familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. The community that seemed foreign has revealed itself as fundamentally similar to communities everywhere. People trying to live well, support each other, and find meaning in daily existence. Mrs. Vinokurov shifts in her sleep, pulling her blankets closer. Mr. Vinokurov's breathing is deep and regular, the sound of someone who's labored hard and rests fully. Somewhere outside, that dog barks again once, then falls silent. The power plant rumbles distantly, maintaining its endless vigil. These sounds create a soundscape of security, of systems functioning, of life maintained through constant effort. The aurora continues its silent dance overhead, unseen from inside but nonetheless present, painting the frozen landscape with ethereal light that touches nothing and warms nothing, but remains beautiful regardless. in that beauty, purposeless, unwitnessed, existing simply because the physics of solar wind and magnetosphere create conditions for its appearance. There's something profound. Life doesn't need to be witnessed to have value. Existence doesn't require validation. Things simply are beautiful and harsh in equal measure, and meaning comes from the experiencing, not the judging. Your thoughts grow slower, softer, like the snow that falls outside in the darkness. Gentle, persistent, accumulating grain by grain into something substantial. You think about home, wherever that is, with its moderate temperatures and abundant resources and easy existence that you once took for granted. You'll return there soon. Carry this experience like a strange gift. Try to explain to people who've never been colder than a winter day what it means to live, where cold is the defining fact of existence. But words will fail, probably. How do you convey minus 71 degrees Celsius to someone who's never experienced it? How do you explain the community bonds forged by shared survival? How do you describe the particular quality of darkness that comes from 3 hours of dim daylight stretched across months? You can tell the facts, the temperatures, the logistics, the adaptations, but the lived experience will remain yours alone, a memory that defies complete communication. And maybe that's fine. Maybe some experiences aren't meant to be fully shared, only held gently in memory and allowed to shape you in ways both obvious and subtle. Maybe the point of coming to Oymyakon wasn't to understand completely, but simply to witness, to be present, to add your small thread to the vast tapestry of human experience in all its diverse expressions. The stove's flames have settled to glowing embers now, requiring no more fuel until morning. The temperature in the room has dropped slightly, maybe 5 degrees Celsius instead of 10 degrees Celsius, but it's still warm enough, still safe enough, still home enough for sleep to come easily. Your body has stopped fighting the environment and instead accepted it, relaxed into it, found its accommodation with cold and dark and the strange rhythms of Arctic life. In this state of deepening rest, you're aware of a profound peace, not because Oymyakon is peaceful exactly, but because you've witnessed life persisting, meaning being created, community being maintained despite overwhelming challenges. There's something deeply reassuring in that. If humans can build lives here at minus 71 degrees Celsius, in perpetual darkness, at the absolute edge of survivability, then perhaps we're more resilient than we imagine. Perhaps the challenges we face elsewhere, whatever they might be, are more manageable than they seem. The last conscious thought that crosses your mind is simple: gratitude. For the Vinokurovs who welcomed you, for the community that tolerated your presence, for the experience of witnessing this extraordinary ordinary life, for the privilege of seeing human resilience expressed not through dramatic gestures but through daily continuity. And then, finally, completely, you sleep. Outside, Oymyakon continues. The cold, the darkness, the stubborn persistence of life where it shouldn't exist. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same small triumphs, the same quiet determination. The village will wake, tend its fires, feed its people, and carry on doing what it's done for generations. Existing, surviving, living in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. But for now, sleep. Let the darkness hold you gently. Let the cold remain outside where it belongs. Let the community's warmth, both literal and metaphorical, surround you with safety. Rest here at the edge of the world, in this impossible place that exists because people decided it should, and continues because people decide daily that it will. Sleep well. Dream of ice and stars and the quiet strength of persistence. Tomorrow is coming, with its cold and its light and its endless possibilities. But tonight, simply rest in the knowledge that you've witnessed something remarkable. Ordinary human life, maintained with extraordinary effort, in a place that defies easy understanding. Sweet dreams from Oymyakon, where even dreams freeze and fall as whispers of stars.